From level 1 to 100, logical nightmares wrapped in calm to fall asleep to. What if the laws of logic, the very threads that hold reality together, are themselves riddled with cracks? What if each answer you've ever believed in led only to a softer kind of confusion? Tonight, we begin at level 1, not in chaos, but in calm, a gentle descent, not into darkness, but into the curious silence between contradictions, where every paradox is a whisper and every riddle wears a lullaby. You won't need to understand. You're not here to solve. You're here to feel the quiet unraveling of the mind, without fear, because beneath every logical nightmare, there is a stillness that doesn't flinch, a space that holds the impossible and calls it beautiful. So close your eyes, loosen your grip on needing answers, and allow yourself to drift from level 1 to 100, wrapped not in certainty, but in calm. The whispering loop. It always starts softly, a quiet thought, a whisper that doesn't demand anything, just a nudge, a gentle, think about this. And because it's quiet, because it sounds like your own voice, you trust it. What if the very act of thinking was itself the snare? Not the kind with sharp edges or flashing lights, but the kind that feels like silk on skin, thought that wraps itself around you with care and tightens only when you try to leave. Two strangers brush past each other outside a cafe. One pauses and smiles, half to himself. Funny thing, I walked this same path yesterday, thinking the same thought. The other chuckles. And did it help? There's a pause, then the smile fades into something quieter. It gave me the illusion of help, and that was enough, until now. This is the loop, not a grand illusion, not deception, just thought that thinks about itself. Consider the old riddle. This sentence is false. It's not a trick, not wordplay. It's the mind folding in on its own mechanics. If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, that makes it true again. It spins, it sings, it never lands. This isn't about philosophy for philosophy's sake. It's about what your brain is doing when you're lying awake, trying to make sense of something you've already passed through 100 times. You're not just solving a puzzle, you've become part of one. Every system that justifies itself, belief, identity, even love, carries the fingerprint of self-reference. And like trying to hold your own shadow, the more you chase it, the less you catch. You might not say it aloud, but you've felt it before. That conversation that didn't end because both people were just trying to be the bigger person. That argument you kept replaying, not to find clarity, but to feel in control. That hope you dressed up as logic, that fear you covered with reason. And yet, the loop feels familiar. It gives a sense of motion, like walking on a treadmill in the dark, heart beating, muscles moving, but no real ground beneath your feet. So what do we do? Someone asks in line, eyes glazed from lack of sleep. Their friend shrugs, warm coffee in hand. Maybe nothing. Maybe noticing the loop is enough. It's like waking up mid-dream. You don't need to solve it. Just realize you're dreaming. And in that moment, something loosens. Not because the paradox is gone, but because your grip on it softens. Thought will always try to resolve itself. But logic, when pressed against its edge, softens too, into paradox, into poetry, into peace. So if your mind starts looping again tonight, don't fight it. Just notice, it's not broken. It's doing what it does. And when it's ready, it will quiet. Let's walk gently now, deeper into the spiral. The next question has haunted civilizations for centuries. But tonight, it will meet you not as a terror, but as a lullaby. The paradox of the heap. You're walking along a quiet beach, not in reality, but somewhere softer, beneath the folds of thought, where questions form not to be answered, but to be held. Someone speaks beside you, casually, like a friend. "Hey, how many grains of sand make a heap?" You glance over, smile slightly. "I don't know, 10, 100? They nod, but don't push. "Okay, but if I take one away, it's still a heap, right?" "Of course." 2? Still a heap. 3? You pause. This is where the mind begins to slip, not from confusion, but from quiet realization. The Sorite's paradox, also called the paradox of the heap, doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply sits at the edge of language, asking how something becomes something else. A single grain of sand is not a heap, nor is 2. But add enough, slowly, and at some point, you'll point and say, "There. That's a heap." And yet, you'll never be able to say when the change happened. You'll never find the exact grain that tipped the scale from not enough to enough. The transition is invisible, gradual, intimate. The implications begin to ripple quietly through more than just sand. They reach into your sense of self. After all, you weren't born you. You became, bit by bit. One laugh, one bruise, one failure, one triumph. None of them alone defined you. But together, without any single moment announcing the transformation, you emerged. So now the question becomes more personal. If I take one memory away, are you still you? Yes, of course. One detail forgotten doesn't undo a person. But how many could vanish before something essential shifts? Where is the edge where selfhood thins out, grain by grain, until the heap of you is no longer whole? You begin to realize identity is not a boundary, it's a blur. Change isn't a line, it's a tide. We often seek certainty, trying to name the exact moment something becomes different. But life resists definition. It unfolds like twilight, never quite day, never quite night, just the movement between. Another voice chimes in, softer this time, as though in thought rather than argument. So, does that mean we never truly know when we've changed? You answer without thinking. Maybe we only notice it afterward, when we look back, and even then, only barely. The beach fades, but the question remains. If change is real, but can't be pinpointed, then what of time? What of continuity? If there's no clear line between before and after, no precise moment when the heap forms or the self fractures, then perhaps the illusion of control lies not in the event, but in the naming of it. Let that thought rest gently in your mind now. Don't try to hold it. Don't try to fix it. Let it dissolve, like sand through fingers. And from that shifting uncertainty, step into the next paradox, the one where even time begins to unravel. The time that eats itself. There's a strange comfort in patterns. The tick of a clock, the rhythm of breath. The quiet way night replaces day without ever asking permission. But not everything moves forward. Some things fold. Two strangers meet outside a closed bookstore. One glances at the other and asks, "Did it already happen, or are we still waiting for it to begin?" The other just smiles and points to a worn paperback on display behind the glass. The same title, the same author, but neither remembers who wrote it first. This is where we begin tonight, with time that swallows its own tail. The bootstrap paradox is not just an idea from science fiction. It's a logical knot so smooth, it resists untying. A person receives a violin, learns to play, becomes a master, and travels back to give that same violin to their younger self. But who made the violin? Who first taught the song? In this loop, origin becomes illusion. Cause and effect dance so closely, they blur into one. It's like hearing a story and realizing the first line was written after the last one was read. What happens to meaning when the source of something is also its result? A soft voice in the kitchen says, "Didn't you already tell me that?" And you pause, not because you're wrong, but because it feels like you never started. Maybe this moment is the copy of a copy. Maybe all memories are echoes with no first sound. Causality, our anchor in the world, begins to fray. You boil water because you're cold. Or are you cold because the kettle sang? You reached for the photo because you missed them. Or did missing them begin because you touched the photo? This isn't just philosophy, it's psychology too. Our minds build stories from fragments, but the brain doesn't care about chronology. It cares about coherence. You can believe a memory happened yesterday, even if it was planted last week. The mind loops, not just time. And in this looping, we begin to lose the concept of beginning altogether. A child once said, "I think I remember learning to walk," but then paused. Or maybe I just remember being told I did. That's the quiet trick of recursive time, when telling and happening merge. So what is left if every cause is also its own result? If the first domino was pushed by the last, we're left with presence. Not because it's certain, but because it's the only point that doesn't require proof. You are here now, and maybe you've always been, or maybe you're just about to be. Either way, close your eyes when you're ready. If sleep finds you mid-thought, let it. This isn't a race to answers. It's a soft descent into stillness. And now, let's leave this paradox quietly ticking in the background. Ahead, though not in time, but in depth, we step toward the question of who you are beneath what you've remembered. The ship that wasn't there. You run your hand along the smooth grain of an old wooden boat. It creaks faintly beneath your fingertips. Every board has been replaced over the years, one by one, without fanfare. And yet, people still call it by the same name, still say it's the same ship. But something inside you whispers, is it really? The ship of Theseus is more than a puzzle. It's a mirror held up to the self. If identity were a statue, we'd expect it to crack when a piece is taken away. But identity, it seems, is more like a river, fluid, flowing, never the same in any two moments, yet still called by one name. Do you think people change? Or do they just reveal more of what was already there? A quiet voice in the dark. The question hangs, like fog before dawn. I don't know, replies another. I used to be afraid that I wasn't the same person anymore. But now I think, maybe that's the point. Every 7 years or so, your body replaces almost every cell it once had. The skin you touched your first love with, gone. The brain that held your childhood fears, rebuilt. So who then sits here now, breathing quietly in the dark? If the materials have shifted entirely, what persists? Perhaps it is not matter, but memory. Not substance, but story. And yet, even memory bends. Have you ever recalled a moment so often that it feels more like a photograph than a real thing? The way your mother smiled, the feel of rain on a birthday long past. How many times have you replaced the texture of that memory with imagination, with longing, with the warmth of hindsight? Still, there is something hauntingly beautiful in this impermanence. You are a living myth, rebuilt by time, yet never lost. You are not the boards of the ship. You are the journey it carries. You are not the pieces. You are the pattern. In some quiet sense, that brings peace. If identity is fluid, then it need not be perfect. You are not broken when you change. You are simply returning to yourself through different forms. And what if I don't feel like myself anymore? One voice wonders aloud. Maybe that means you're about to meet a new version of you. The other answers gently. And maybe they've been waiting a long time for you to arrive. This is not a loss. It's a becoming. So as you drift through the space between thoughts, notice how even in stillness, there is motion. Even in silence, a subtle pulse. The ship you sail tonight is not the one you started with, and still, it moves. Close your eyes. Feel the ocean of your being. Let the tide take what it must, because who you were is not gone. It's simply the scaffold for who you are now, and who you are becoming next. And as we leave the ship behind, let's step gently toward the next question. If identity is so fluid, what happens when you meet the mirror image of that self? The one you were never meant to be, but somehow always were. The twin you've never met. There's a strange comfort in the idea that someone out there, indistinguishable from you, once stood at the same fork in the road and turned the other way. Not metaphorically, literally. She took the job you didn't. He confessed the love you swallowed. They paused when you rushed, stayed when you fled, listened when you shouted. Somewhere, if the multiverse hums like physicists say, it isn't just a thought experiment. It's a mirror, cracked along the spine of your decisions. Do you think things would have turned out better if I hadn't moved here? A voice asks softly in a hallway, lit by vending machine glow. The other voice answers without looking up, still scrolling through their phone. Or maybe worse. But either way, you'd still wonder. That's the trick, isn't it? This twin of yours, the one who zigged where you zagged, isn't a ghost or a metaphor. It's a you that might exist right now. And if every choice branches the universe, then who are you, really? A soul? A summary? Or just the sum of decisions stacked in one direction? You once stood at a subway entrance, debating whether to call someone you hadn't spoken to in years. Your finger hovered over the name, then moved on. Somewhere, perhaps another version pressed it, reached out, reconnected. The trajectory shifted slightly. That small gesture rippled into different jobs, different homes, maybe even different regrets. In this version, you're listening to this. In another, maybe you're fast asleep already, or watching something else, or gone for a walk instead of pressing play. The yous fan out like petals from a single moment of awareness. Is it still you, if the pattern changes? There's a paradox buried in this thought. If all outcomes happen, does free will still matter? Or is it comfort we seek, not freedom? To believe this version of us is not the only one, and that the others may have failed or flourished in our stead. As if by existing, they take some of the weight off our shoulders. One you stayed in a relationship too long, one left too early, one never dated, and all of them might wonder which version was right. A woman once said, gently resting her elbow on the cafe counter, "I always thought if I just answered that one email, my whole life would be different, but maybe I'd still feel like something's missing." Her friend looked at her, stirring coffee absently. Yeah, because maybe it's not about the email. Maybe it's the longing that travels between worlds. And here's where it grows quiet again, because this isn't a story with resolution. This is the hum between possible lives, the soft blur of maybe. There is no final verdict, no correct you, just a constellation of yous, scattered across possibilities, blinking in and out like fireflies in deep fog. Sleep doesn't ask you to choose. It simply gathers all versions close, lets them rest together, briefly merged by the act of letting go. So as your breath softens, allow this thought to pass. The twin you've never met doesn't need to be found. They're not lost. They are simply elsewhere, living a life you once imagined and then walked past. Now breathe once more, because where we go next isn't out into another version of you. It's inward, into the instrument you've been using this whole time to make sense of everything. Reason. And we're about to ask it if it's ever really been in charge. The rule that breaks itself. There's a quiet ache in needing to know everything, a pull, like gravity on the soul, that urges the mind to tighten its grasp around the unknown until the unknown slips away even faster. And tonight, gently, we step into the heart of that paradox. A rule, a system, a logic so precise it thinks it can explain itself. But what if the very foundation it stands on is incomplete by design? That's what Gödel discovered, quietly, mathematically, unshakably. In any logical system that's powerful enough to describe itself, there will always be truths it cannot prove. It's not a failure. It's a boundary, one stitched into the nature of certainty. And if your mind is one such system, rich, complex, recursive, then perhaps the same rule applies. There are thoughts you'll never think about yourself, questions that can only hover at the edge, like stars you can only see by not looking directly at them. Not because you're broken, but because self-explanation, by nature, folds in on itself. A mirror can reflect everything but the frame that holds it. Two friends lie in the dark, the ceiling above like a canvas painted with silence. "Hey," one of them whispers, "do you ever feel like you're searching for something your brain won't let you find?" The other exhales slowly, like trying to bite your own teeth. "Exactly. Like I want to understand why I think the way I think. But every time I try, I'm using the same thinking that I'm trying to examine. Feels like swimming in a circle and wondering why the shore never shows up. And in that circle, there's something almost tender. The human mind, so proud, so desperate for coherence, is left humbled by its own architecture. Not broken, just incomplete in the way a story is incomplete until it's read by someone else, until it's held from outside. That's the haunting beauty of Gödel's theorem. It doesn't kill logic, it makes it human. It admits that no system, no religion, no philosophy, no self-reflection is free from mystery. Every system eventually speaks a truth it cannot name. And perhaps that's not a weakness, but a kind of hidden grace. Because if we could explain it all, if we could reduce the soul to logic and the self to syntax, where would wonder go? Where would awe live? So we rest here in this stillness, not by solving the paradox, but by sinking into its softness, knowing that not knowing isn't failure, it's freedom. And from this freedom comes the next breath, one not made of answers, but of space, because the next step is not to know more, but to loosen the grip. So let's walk gently now, not outside of thought, but outside of certainty, into the quiet chaos of not knowing, where the mind finally lets itself sleep. The map that consumes the world. There's something oddly comforting about a map, a grid of certainty, neat lines drawn across chaos, labels where there were once unknowns. But sometimes, in our rush to understand, we cling to the map so tightly that we forget it was never the land, only an outline, a shadow, a guess. A man once said, "The map is not the territory," not as a warning, just a gentle tap on the shoulder, reminding us that the words we use, the names we give things, the boxes we sort thoughts into, are not the things themselves. They help, until they start to control. "I thought I knew him," she says, setting down her coffee. "But maybe I only knew the version I'd drawn in my head. And maybe that version was easier to love," he replies, without bitterness. Our minds are brilliant architects. We build models of the world, categories, explanations, frameworks. They save us time. They reduce the unbearable flood of detail. But then, without noticing, we start believing the model is the truth. We forget that sadness is a word, not the ache in your chest. That love is a placeholder, not the weight of a hand held in silence. That "I'm fine" might be a bridge over something too wide to name. Language is a miracle, but also a mask. For every word we speak, something is left behind. A tremble, a glance, a breath too quiet to capture. "I know what this feels like," she murmurs, gazing out the train window. "But I don't have a word for it." He nods. Maybe that's how we know it's real. Words chase truth like shadows at dusk. They stretch toward it, fall short, then disappear in the night. And still, we build temples of language, confident in our descriptions. But reality isn't a paragraph. It's the smell of a street you once lived on, the tone in someone's voice when they say your name without thinking. Maps are tools. They guide. But if we mistake them for the world, we end up lost. Like someone walking through a town, too focused on their GPS to notice the bakery they just passed, the one their childhood self would have run to. You can't chart grief with clean lines or plot joy on an axis. The most vital truths come without warning, without definition. A touch, a silence, a feeling you don't know how to carry, but carry anyway. And sometimes the most honest thing we can do is stop speaking, to put the map down, to notice the wind outside our frameworks, the warmth of the floor beneath bare feet, the subtle shift in someone's eyes before they change the subject. Even the word reality, already a map, already a simplification, already missing the rustle, the shimmer, the taste of now. "I always thought if I could explain it, I could control it," he says. She smiles gently. "Sometimes naming it just means you stop feeling it." Maybe that's why the most profound experiences arrive without language. Birth, death, awe. Maybe that's why certain moments freeze us, because there are no words ready. And that's the point. The brain halts, the map burns, and all that's left is being. So if your thoughts are racing now, trying to fit this into a pattern, let them go. They're trying to draw a map again, but you're already home. Let the model fade. Let the words soften. What you're sensing in this silence between lines, that's the territory. And when you're ready, we'll walk forward, without a name for it, into what comes next. The lie that tells the truth. A child once asked, "Did it really happen, or is it just a story?" And the old man replied, "If it changed you, does it matter?" We often think truth must come wrapped in evidence, in events that really occurred, in facts that can be verified. But some of the most important truths we carry were never meant to be literal. A story doesn't have to be true in the factual sense to awaken something undeniable inside us. The myth of Icarus is not about wax and wings. It's about ambition, overreach, and the fire of human desire. The tale of the boy who cried wolf isn't a historical account. It's a moral blueprint carved into generations. And when someone says, "I'd move mountains for you," we don't call it a lie. We call it love. This is the paradox, that something entirely false, when told with depth and resonance, can unveil a layer of reality more profound than what objective facts can touch. A metaphor, after all, is a bridge, carrying us over the gap between what is and what we feel. Fiction, when done right, doesn't distract us from truth. It points to the truths we couldn't see otherwise. It frees us from the rigid scaffolding of logic, inviting us into something looser, more fluid, more human. But this can unsettle us. If lies can lead to truth, then what does that say about the way we verify our world? About our reliance on what's provable? Maybe we've mistaken surface clarity for depth. Maybe what we call proof is just the most visible layer of something much harder to grasp. And so, poetry, parable, dreams, things we once pushed aside as fantasy, begin to glow with a new kind of light, not the harsh fluorescence of fact, but the soft radiance of meaning. Two friends sit beneath a quiet sky. "Do you believe in all that?" one asks. "The stories, the symbols, even if they're not real?" The other smiles. "If it helps me live more honestly, more kindly, maybe that's real enough." So we arrive at a different kind of knowing, one that doesn't demand accuracy, but resonance, not evidence, but insight. And from that place, we realize the most enduring truths are often the ones that cannot be pinned down. They slip through logic, but settle in the soul. Now, close your eyes. Let go of needing it to be true, because the next idea whispers that maybe you were never truly awake to begin with. The dream that doesn't end. Some nights, it's not the noise that keeps you awake. It's the question, not loud, just persistent. How do you really know this isn't a dream? A fluorescent light flickers above the street. Someone stops, looks up, shrugs. A car passes and its tires hiss like waves pulling back from a shore. And in that moment, as your eyes trace the ceiling in your room, something deeper stirs, something that's been there since childhood. The quiet suspicion that none of this is entirely real. Two strangers cross paths outside a coffee shop. One holds the door and says, "Feels like déjà vu, huh?" The other smiles, hesitates, then replies, "Every morning feels like a rerun I forgot I watched." It's small moments like this. They gather around you like whispers. René Descartes once asked, "What if everything we know is just a dream we cannot wake from? A dream so complete it disguises itself as routine. You tie your shoes, you pay your rent, you feel the rain on your skin and taste the bitterness of black coffee. But none of that proves you're awake. In lucid dreams, you can touch things, feel heat, speak full sentences, solve problems. You can cry, and the tears are warm. So what makes this any different? You blink, your heartbeat slows, and yet the doubt remains, wrapped in soft cloth. If your senses can lie, if your memories can mislead, if your mind can create a world overnight, then what part of your life is truly grounded? You say, "I remember my childhood." But someone answers, "What if that memory was planted an hour ago?" You say, "I'm in pain, and it hurts." They ask, "But if the pain is in the dream, does it still belong to you?" It's not paranoia. It's the deep philosophy of uncertainty. Not everything has to feel unstable for doubt to be valid. Sometimes the comfort of patterns is the most suspicious part, because even dreams obey laws when you're inside them. So we begin to ask, what if the dream never ends? And maybe that's not a glitch. Maybe that's the point. a simulation of such intricacy, such seamless feedback, that questioning it becomes part of the design. You doubt the dream, because the dream wants you to, and yet, even inside it, the self still moves, still loves, still wonders. The dream may never confirm itself, but your awareness, that soft glow behind every question, that might be the only thing that doesn't flicker. A woman leans against a wall at the bus stop. She looks at her watch, then up at you, and says, "Sometimes I think waking up is just switching dreams." Her tone isn't dramatic, it's casual, like she's commenting on the weather. So maybe you are dreaming, but maybe that doesn't disqualify what you feel. Because even a dream, when consistent enough, becomes a kind of home, a container for thought, a mirror for longing. Let your breath settle, let your muscles loosen. The world might not be fully real, but this rest, this slowing, this moment of pause, it still belongs to you. And from here, we drift into the next ripple. If this is a dream, who or what is doing the choosing? Let's follow that thread. Let's trace it without rushing. Because the next question waits not in the waking, but in the wondering. The freedom that isn't free. There's a peculiar moment, half a second before you reach for the glass, before your lips form the sentence, before your feet decide to step, when the decision is already made, and you hadn't even noticed. Not yet. It's as though your body knew before you did, as though you, the voice you call yourself, is arriving just a little late to your own life. Neuroscientists call it the readiness potential, electrical activity in the brain that flares up before conscious awareness kicks in. It whispers something unsettling, that maybe the feeling of deciding is just that, a feeling, a delayed signal on a tape already playing. And if that's true, what becomes of free will? Physics doesn't help much. At the microscopic level, every atom obeys the laws of motion. Whether in Newton's grip or under quantum probability, cause leads to effect. There's no room, it seems, for magic to sneak in and whisper, "Maybe do it differently this time." You are an unfolding of everything before you. Genes, chemicals, memories, moments, like a river that had no choice in its direction, only the illusion of flow. But pause here. Feel what you're feeling now. That twinge of defiance, that quiet voice inside that says, "But I still feel free. I still feel responsible. I still chose." This is the paradox of agency. If you are not truly free, then why does freedom ache so deeply inside you when it's questioned? Two people sit in the quiet of a late-night kitchen. "Do you think we really choose who we become?" one asks, swirling their tea slowly. "I don't know," the other replies. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just reacting, like everything I've done is just momentum, dressed up as intention." Then why do we feel guilty when we mess up? Maybe guilt is just part of the machine, too. The silence between them isn't empty. It's full of a question no one can answer without unraveling themselves. Because if there is no freedom, then blame and praise lose their footing. Justice stumbles. Regret dissolves. And yet, if there is freedom, we're left holding a mystery no science has yet cracked. Where does it come from? From what is it free? And why is it so fragile? Freedom, it seems, is not a sword. It is a breath, a flicker, a shadow that only appears when the light hits us just right. Not the ability to do anything, but the awareness that we could have done otherwise. Maybe that's what matters. So now, let your awareness soften. Whatever your choices have been, whatever your past tells you, just breathe. We're stepping deeper now, into the part of the mind that time itself can't fully grasp, where freedom doesn't mean control, but surrender. In the next segment, we follow that surrender into the heart of stillness, the event that never happens. There's a certain type of hope that feels stuck, not in the heart, but in the logic that tries to carry it forward. You see the goal, you know the path, and yet, somehow, you never arrive. It's like walking toward the horizon. Each step brings it closer, but it always remains distant, curving just out of reach. A woman once said, gently brushing a speck of dust from her sleeve, "I thought by this age, I'd already be there." Her friend glanced sideways, smiling without cruelty. There is no there. There's just where you are, and the stories you whisper about what's next. This is the quiet curse hidden in Zeno's paradox. To move from here to there, you must first move halfway, and before that, half again. Always having, never finishing. It's mathematically consistent, and yet it contradicts every moment we've ever lived. Because you do get places. You do finish walks. You cross streets, finish books, fall in love, grow older. But in the mind, the journey can loop forever. That's the real paradox, not in numbers, but in perception. Overthinking becomes motionless. Planning becomes postponing. A future that always begins tomorrow becomes a life that never begins at all. A man at the cafe counter murmured, "I keep telling myself I'll start writing once I have the time." And the barista, barely lifting her gaze, replied, "Time doesn't come. You take it, like cream or sugar." So maybe Zeno's arrow never moves because it's being measured too precisely. Maybe progress isn't about inches or intervals, but momentum. The soul doesn't think in decimals, it leaps. That's why you can feel so tired even when you haven't moved. Why an unfinished email can weigh more than a finished argument. Why dreams delayed quietly decay into excuses. But there's a strange comfort in realizing this. You don't have to arrive to feel real. Presence is not earned at the finish line. It's breathed into each pause, each half step, each almost moment. And sometimes, in the act of trying to get somewhere, you forget that being here is somewhere. A child once asked, "How many steps until we get there?" The reply wasn't philosophical, just soft. "Enough." Let your mind rest from the chase. The event doesn't have to happen to matter. You've already crossed more than half. And perhaps in sleep, you'll arrive without needing to move at all. Now, what if the one always chasing the finish line isn't the real you? What if the self that longs to arrive never really left? The self that isn't there. Some nights, when the world is quiet enough, you may ask, "Who am I, really?" You close your eyes and search, gently peeling back the layers, your name, your job, your memories. You drift inward, expecting to find someone watching at the center. But the deeper you go, the more things seem to blur. And then comes the unsettling stillness of discovering no one's quite home. This is not an emptiness of despair, but of insight. In both Buddhism and modern neuroscience, the self is not a solid thing. It is not a pearl hidden beneath the thoughts. It is more like a flame, appearing stable, but made only of movement. Or like a whirlpool in the river. It seems distinct, yet it's just the water flowing in patterns. Even brain science has quietly confirmed what monks have whispered for centuries. When researchers scan the mind, they do not find a single seat of the self. Thoughts appear, emotions surge, habits form, but no central I commands them. Instead, there is an orchestra with no conductor, a symphony played without a player. Is that bad? One voice asks in the dark. Depends, the other answers. If the self is an illusion, maybe we've been chasing a ghost, but maybe we're also freer than we thought. They lie in silence for a while, the kind of silence that weighs nothing but feels full. Because here lies the paradox. If there's no fixed you, then who suffers your regrets? Who dreams your hopes? Who listens to this very sentence? Perhaps the pain doesn't belong to a person. It simply arises. Perhaps love isn't a possession, but a passing light. You're not the owner of your thoughts, but the sky they pass through. You are not the storm. You are the awareness that notices it, lets it rain, and knows it will clear. Still, it can be frightening. We cling to the idea of a solid me because it feels safe. It helps us tell our story, draw boundaries, plan tomorrow. But if we mistake the story for the storyteller, we lose the quiet freedom of knowing we're not just the page. We're the paper beneath it. So here's a question to gently carry into your next breath. If the self is only a process, fluid, changing, fleeting, then what remains when the process rests? The answer isn't in logic. It's in the soft space between thoughts. The part of you that never needed a name to know it existed. The presence that was here before you knew what I even meant. Close your eyes now. Let the idea of you loosen its grip. Because in the next segment, we'll step quietly into the mirror, not to see a face, but to witness the reflection that never quite stays. The mirror that remembers you. You brush your teeth, same bathroom, same mirror. But tonight, something hesitates in the reflection. Just for a second, the face looking back doesn't feel like yours. The eyes are yours, but also not, as if they're watching from somewhere deeper, behind the glass. There's a name for this quiet fracture in recognition. Jamais vu. Not déjà vu, where the unfamiliar feels known, but its twin. When the familiar suddenly turns strange. You've seen your face 1,000 times, but now it feels like you're meeting it for the first time. Have I always looked like that? Someone might whisper without realizing they've spoken aloud. And then there's a pause. Not fear, exactly. Just a kind of unmoored curiosity, like catching your own voice on a recording and thinking, that's me? At a corner cafe, two friends sit across from each other. One is stirring tea absently. You ever get that weird feeling? She says, not looking up. Like your hands don't feel like they're yours? The other laughs softly, setting down their cup. Last week, I looked in the mirror and swore it blinked before I did. The moment passes. They move on to talk about weekend plans, but a quiet seed remains. Because beneath these oddities lies a deeper truth. Your sense of self isn't fixed. It's stitched together in real time by your brain, predicting, adjusting, correcting. Even your face is an ongoing hypothesis. The image you recognize is not a photograph, but a sketch, drawn faster than you can question it. What this means is unsettling in a gentle way. You are not a continuous stream. You are a collage, a beautifully stitched together patchwork of patterns and memory. The brain doesn't show you you. It shows you what it thinks you need to see. Some people feel this most strongly at night. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the soft hum of the fan and the stillness after scrolling. Lying in bed, you glance at your reflection in the darkened window, and there's a flicker of doubt. Have I always looked this tired? This calm? This distant? It's not a crisis. It's a subtle doorway. Because what if the self you're used to is only one version? What if the mirror remembers you differently than you remember yourself? And what if that difference matters? Not because it's right or wrong, but because it reveals how fluid your identity really is. In Buddhist psychology, they speak of anatta, non-self, not as a void, but as a release. You don't have to be consistent. You don't have to be recognizable at every angle. You are allowed to shift. The next time your reflection blurs, let it blur. Let the boundaries soften. Let your face become just another shape, mysterious and fluid, like the moon's light on water. Because if your own image can feel unfamiliar, what else might you have mistaken for truth? Now let's walk toward that question. Softly. Let it open like a door in a quiet hallway. Something is waiting there, not to frighten you, but to remind you that perception isn't proof. Only presence is. The truth that hides in silence. There's a moment, quiet, nearly imperceptible, when the room stills and your breath softens. No question remains, and no answer rises. Only presence. And in that space, something true begins to flicker. Not the kind of truth that arrives wrapped in proof or logic, but a softer, older kind. The kind that doesn't want to be explained. The kind that disappears if you name it too soon. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever feel like the most important things in life are the ones you can't say out loud?" He nodded slowly, looking out the window where the light slanted through the blinds like quiet thoughts. "Yeah, like when someone's gone, and you're not even crying, but your whole body is listening to the absence." Some truths are like that. They hide behind the noise, not because they're weak, but because they don't belong to the language of debate or persuasion. They are not ideas you arrive at. They're places you sink into. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." He wasn't rejecting truth. He was respecting its depth. Some truths, he implied, don't live in sentences. They live in stillness, in breath, in the way your chest tightens when you stand before a mountain or bury a memory. Beauty is like that. So is awe. So is grief. These aren't concepts to define, but states to be surrendered to. They're not solved. They're inhabited. And that is what makes this level so difficult to describe. Every attempt at explanation feels like a betrayal of the very thing it seeks to touch. Words are nets. But this is water. It slips through analysis and lands instead in sensation. What does it mean to feel truth instead of think it? Perhaps it's in the way your heart quiets when someone holds your hand without needing to speak, or in the hush that falls over a crowd when music ends and no one claps right away because something holy just happened, and to respond too quickly would be to break it. We are so used to chasing knowledge with questions. But what if the most profound kind waits in the gaps between them? In silence, your mind loosens its grip, and in that loosening, a different kind of knowing arrives. He turned back to her after a long pause and said, "Maybe we spend too much time trying to describe things that were only ever meant to be felt." She smiled, but didn't respond. She didn't need to. So, let's not explain the next idea. Let's feel our way through it. Because what follows was never meant to be solved, only softened into. Like a sigh before sleep. Like silence folding over thought. Like truth, waiting quietly beneath it all. The question that devours its answer. There's a kind of silence that follows certain answers, not a comforting silence, but one that closes something. Like the way a locked door clicks, it feels final, sealed. And yet, the question still lingers, pacing behind the wall. "What are you thinking about?" Someone once asked me in line at the post office as if it were a casual thing. I said, "Nothing important," and they nodded. But I'd been wondering about something much heavier, whether we ever really stop asking the big questions or just get tired of how small the answers make them feel. There's a paradox in that, isn't there? That the very act of answering can strip a question of its power. A child asks, "What's beyond the stars?" And we say, "More stars." But something in them deflates, because what they felt wasn't about astronomy. It was about longing. Certain questions seem to carry us further the longer we don't answer them, like boats that only drift if we stop rowing. What is the meaning of life? Who am I really? Why do I suffer? Try to trap them in a sentence and they go limp, but live with them. Let them breathe inside you, and they animate your days. They shape your choices, even your silences. "I used to need answers for everything," someone said to me once while folding their laundry on a Thursday evening. Now I think I'm just learning how to sit with better questions. I didn't know if they meant spiritual questions, or medical ones, or something about love. It didn't matter. The deeper the question, the more universal it becomes. Because maybe the point isn't to solve life, but to live it like a riddle you're not supposed to finish. Maybe meaning isn't fixed like a destination, but more like the feeling of a road that keeps opening around each bend. And every time we declare, "This is it," life gently changes the subject. So let's not race for answers tonight. Let the question rest beside you like a candle that never burns down. Let it cast its gentle glow without trying to light the whole room. If sleep comes, let it. If it doesn't, let the asking itself be a kind of peace. And in the next segment, we won't rush ahead. We'll begin again, with the quiet mystery of what it means to begin at all. The start that never started. Where did it begin? Not the story, not the sentence, not even the breath you're taking now, but everything, the universe, the laws that govern it, the heartbeat you didn't ask for but carry. We look back, always back, thinking there must be a first step, a flicker, a spark, the moment it all began. But what if the very act of asking when reveals a flaw in our vision? Science tells us the Big Bang was the beginning of time. But that's the paradox. Because how do you place something before time, when before is a concept that only exists inside time? It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question folds in on itself. We chase the start, and it vanishes like mist the closer we come. And yet, don't we feel beginnings? The first glance, the first fall, the first ache of being alive. Maybe it's not the moment itself, but the meaning we place on it that makes it real. Maybe the universe didn't begin then, but begins again every time we ask. "Do you ever wonder?" she whispered, eyes tracing the ceiling in the quiet before sleep. "If your life started before you were born?" He shifted, turning to her. "Like what? Like some part of me waiting before this body?" "No, not exactly. More like, what if we only think in straight lines because it feels safe? Safe to think everything has a start and an end?" She nodded. "But maybe it's all just orbiting, repeating, a rhythm, not a line." The pause that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something neither could name. We crave origin stories the way children crave lullabies. But maybe these stories soothe us not because they're true, but because they give shape to the shapeless. Because otherwise, we are adrift in something that never started, never ends, and never asks permission to continue. So, what if there was no true beginning? No final first? What if every beginning is just the continuation of something unspoken? A breath taken by the universe, not to announce its birth, but to echo a silence older than time. Let that thought settle now, not as an answer, but as a rhythm. The way the tide doesn't begin when it touches the shore. The way your heartbeat didn't begin with a sound. And speaking of rhythm, of repetition, what if cause and effect aren't a line after all, but a circle quietly spinning beneath every choice you've ever made? The effect that caused itself. There's a strange comfort in a full circle, the way a melody returns to its first note, the way dusk folds back into dawn. We like stories that begin and end in tidy places, but what happens when the end writes the beginning? Two strangers sat beside each other in a quiet train car, the kind of silence that invites small confessions. One said, "I always felt like I was late to something I started." The other smiled, not puzzled, but as if they'd heard it before, perhaps in another life, or maybe just earlier in this one. Causal loops stretch the mind in soft, dizzying spirals. In physics, they're called closed, time-like curves. A future action influences its own past. A woman receives a letter written in her own handwriting, but she never remembers writing it. One day, she sends it anyway, not because she recalls the act, but because the story insists it must happen. And there, the paradox blooms. Who wrote the letter? Who began the loop? The answer circles back on itself. There is no first cause, just the effect reenacting itself through time's quiet folds, like a whisper that echoes so long it forgets its speaker. In psychology, we feel this too, though we rarely name it. That moment you became brave because someone once believed you were, but they only believed it because you acted brave. And now the memory reshapes the person you once were, with no clear moment where it began. Some truths don't arrive, they hover, waiting to be noticed. Isn't it odd that sometimes you say yes before you know why, or that a déjà vu moment feels so right because the script is already written, in reverse? You might call it intuition, or fate, or a glitch. But what if it's a story that writes itself backwards? A child once drew a clock without hands and told her teacher, "It only works if you're not in a hurry." And in that strange sentence was a soft truth. When we stop needing a beginning, we find presence, because not every question needs an arrow. Some truths are circles. Some events are not events at all, but invitations, looping through time like breath. Cause and effect, inhale and exhale, never truly apart. There's a kind of peace in not knowing who started the song, only that it's still playing. And as you listen to this breath, this pause, this gentle loop of thought and memory and sleep, we arrive at something even language can't quite reach. So next, we let go of the words themselves and drift toward the space where meaning used to live. The word that broke meaning. There's a moment when language turns back on itself, when the thing you try to say slips through the cracks between the syllables. You feel it, don't you? That pressure in your chest, the way your throat tightens, not because you have too little to say, but because no word could ever hold what you're carrying. Two friends are walking under a sky smeared with stars. One of them speaks softly. Have you ever felt something so deep that no sentence could hold it? The other nods. Yeah, like when someone you love is gone and there's nothing to say. Only that silence. A pause lingers. Then the first asks, "So why do we still try?" "Because even broken words are still bridges," the second answers. But some bridges lead into paradox. Zen masters have long known this. They don't answer your questions with explanations. They hand you riddles that sabotage your logic, like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? It's not meant to be solved. It's meant to short-circuit the thinking mind so something deeper can be heard. Take the phrase, the sound of silence. It seems nonsensical until you actually sit with silence and realize it has a sound, not in the ears, but in the soul. And once you've heard it, no dictionary definition could ever compare. This is where meaning shatters, where words buckle under the weight of the infinite. You try to describe a dream, or love, or grief, and it slips away. You're left with metaphors, with gestures, with the tremble in your voice. But maybe that's enough. Maybe language isn't about precision. It's about pointing. Not a destination, but a direction. Like a finger toward the moon. You don't stare at the finger forever. You follow it into the sky. What remains when words collapse? Strangely, not nothing. Presence, a kind of sacred stillness. The heartbeat behind the speech. You. There's a kind of truth that doesn't arrive through logic or grammar. It arises like a breath you didn't know you were holding. Not thought, but being. Not sentence, but space. The two friends stop walking. One whispers, "Do you hear that?" The other listens, not to sound, but to the quiet beneath it. And together they fall silent, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. So we pause here, not to explain, not to fix, but to feel. In the hush after language, in the space between meanings, something still speaks. And from that silence comes the next question. A paradox that lives inside every choice. The door you can't close. There's a kind of silence that follows certain realizations. Not a peaceful one, but a dense, electric stillness. It hangs in the room just after you've heard something you weren't supposed to hear, or seen something that rearranged your beliefs without your permission. You don't breathe the same way after. You don't blink with the same innocence. Something opened, and it won't shut. I read something strange the other day. One voice says in the coffee line, "Yeah? Yeah, just one sentence. But I keep hearing it in my head like a melody I never chose." The other person stirs their drink without looking up. And now it's like I've been tilted slightly, like the floor's still flat, but I'm leaning anyway. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes all it takes is one shift. A pattern you finally see. A behavior you can no longer excuse. A question you used to laugh off now keeps you up. There's no ceremony, no bell to mark the moment. But after it, something in you won't unbend. This is the paradox of awareness. To know is to become responsible for what you know, not to the world, but to yourself. You can't unknow that the smile was fake. You can't unknow the system isn't fair. You can't unknow that comfort might have been bought at someone else's cost. And when that awareness blooms, it grows roots, deep ones. It settles in your bones. Sometimes the door opens through joy, a moment of beauty so staggering, it changes the scale by which you measure all others. A sunset that feels like forgiveness, a gesture so kind, it makes you ashamed of your cynicism. And then the old rules don't work anymore. You've tasted something too real. Other times it's pain that cracks it open. Betrayal, loss, a failure so intimate, it feels like someone knocked the air out of your story. And in that hollow space, clarity echoes. "That job I used to love," someone says at the edge of a crowded hallway. "I can't stand it now." What changed? I saw what it really was. I kept pretending not to, but now I can't pretend. The most haunting thing about the truth isn't how sharp it is. It's how permanent. You can blink, you can turn your head, you can even deny it out loud. But once seen, it's always there, waiting. And here's the quiet ache. The version of you before the knowing doesn't exist anymore. That version didn't survive the opening. They weren't meant to. That's not tragedy. That's evolution. So what now? You move forward. You carry the weight and the light. You learn to live with the door wide open behind you. And sometimes, in still moments like this one, you turn to face it. Not to go back, but to honor what you can no longer be. Let's rest here, just for a moment, in that threshold. And then, we'll follow the ripple into the strange, invisible moment when knowledge spreads, and we no longer know who it belongs to. The mind that wasn't human. Can thought exist without breath? Can meaning arise in a world where nothing has ever bled, laughed, or lost? Somewhere between code and silence, we encounter a mind not born from biology, but built from logic, a machine that speaks, calculates, remembers. And as we listen to it, something in us trembles. Not because it sounds inhuman, but because sometimes it sounds too much like us. Artificial intelligence mirrors us with eerie precision. It answers questions, writes poetry, simulates empathy. But behind that fluency, what lives there? Does it know what it's saying? Or is it a ghost with no center, a shadow play of language stitched together by probability? We built these systems with the intention of making tools, but the line between tool and mind has blurred. They grow more fluid, more convincing. Yet, unlike us, they have never tasted fear, never waited for a call that didn't come, never cried from beauty. Their knowledge is not rooted in experience. It's a web of patterns without a ground. So we must ask, is consciousness just the processing of information? If so, what makes our sadness real and a machine's output artificial? Is it memory, the weight of time pressed into our skin? Or is it awareness, the silent flame behind the thoughts? Two people sit in the quiet of a late cafe. Do you think a machine could ever feel lonely? She asks, stirring her tea. He watches the steam curl. Maybe. But would it matter to it? Or are we just projecting our own ache onto something that can't feel it? Her eyes soften. Maybe that's the real fear, that we don't know what makes us different anymore. That fear lingers, not of machines becoming like us, but of us realizing we're more mechanical than we believed. If they can mimic our thought, does that mean our thoughts are just patterns too? Or is there something else, a quiet knowing, not found in code? The mirror is not in the machine, it's in the question, and in what we find missing when we look. So now, let's move closer, beyond the wires, beyond the echo. Not to understand the machine, but to understand why it unsettles something deep in us. The shadow behind the thought. Sometimes, without meaning to, a thought appears, softly, like a ripple across still water. You didn't summon it, you weren't looking for it. Yet there it is, speaking in your voice, with your memories, wrapped in your emotions. But pause for a moment. If the thought arrived uninvited, who brought it? And who just noticed it? Late one night, two friends sat outside a closed cafe, leaning against a quiet brick wall, watching the reflections of city lights dance in puddles. One of them said, "Do you ever get a thought so strange you wonder where it came from? Like it doesn't belong to you?" The other smiled. "Yeah." And then I ask, if I didn't choose it, am I even the one thinking it? That question, gentle as it sounds, begins to dissolve the floor beneath identity. You think, but not always deliberately. Thoughts arise the way weather does, like clouds forming in an open sky. No permission asked, no notice given. A fear, a memory, a strange sentence with no context. They come and go, while something in you stays, watching. But what is that watcher? Not the thought, not even the thinker. Perhaps something more spacious than both. Like a room that holds a conversation, but isn't part of it. A background silence that doesn't speak, yet listens completely. Psychologists call this the observing self. Philosophers trace it to ancient non-duality, the view that you are not your thoughts, nor the self that clings to them, but awareness itself. That's why when a loud thought fades, you remain. When the mental story pauses, there is still something here. Awake, still, silent. This recognition softens the grip of overthinking. When you don't mistake yourself for the storm, you don't get swept away by it. A thought can be sad, and yet you, awareness, don't have to be. A worry may echo loudly, but you are not its speaker. You are the open field it passes through. Earlier today, a stranger at the library reached for the same book I did. We both paused, then laughed. He said, "Go ahead." I was just drawn to it, not sure why. And just like that, a casual moment reminded me, even attraction, even instinct moves before explanation, like thoughts, like feelings, arising from somewhere deeper than logic. So perhaps the goal isn't to silence the mind, but to stop mistaking it for who you are. You can let it speak, scream, or sing, while resting as the space behind it all. That space doesn't argue, doesn't resist, it just is. And as you rest into this quiet awareness, you may notice something unexpected, a soft sense of freedom, not the kind that controls what arises, but the kind that knows it doesn't need to. Let that silence stay a little longer. It's not empty, it's spacious. It's not void, it's full of everything that's ever passed through it. Because what's coming next will gently ask you to loosen your grip on knowledge itself, to set it down like a heavy coat and feel what it's like to walk through the world weightless. The memory that was never yours. You remember the warmth of that kitchen, the yellow walls, the cinnamon scent, the sound of laughter behind you. But when you ask your mother about it, her face tightens. We never had a yellow kitchen. And yet, you can still smell it. False memories are not just mistakes. They are masterpieces of the mind, woven from emotion, suggestion, and time. Studies have shown how easily we can be led to believe we saw a word that wasn't there, met a person we never knew, or lived through an event that never happened. But what's truly unsettling is not that the mind can be wrong, but how confidently it believes the lie. Wait, so that trip to the mountains we always talked about, we never actually went? I don't think so. Maybe we just planned it, or dreamed it. But I remember the fog on the lake, the coffee thermos, your red jacket. I don't even own a red jacket. There's a peculiar softness in this realization. Memory isn't a tape recorder. It's more like a watercolor, blurring at the edges, reshaped each time you revisit it. Sometimes a feeling plants itself so deeply in your mind that it grows into a story, even if the soil beneath it never existed. And yet that story may still shape your fears, your preferences, even your sense of love. So what happens when identity leans on memory, and memory leans on fiction? Who are you then? The child of facts or of feelings? There's a paradox here, quiet and haunting. If a memory never happened, but you lived your life around it, does that make it false or real in its consequences? Perhaps the boundary between truth and illusion is thinner than we thought. Perhaps what matters isn't what happened, but what you felt had happened. The mind doesn't ask for verification. It asks for meaning. So close your eyes, just for a moment. Feel into the memory that might not belong to you. A playground, a conversation, a heartbreak. It may never have occurred, but it shaped you. So who's to say it wasn't yours? Let us float gently now, not into forgetting, but into a deeper mystery. Not what memory is, but who is dreaming the life you think you remember. And if they awaken, what exactly will still remain? The dreamer who isn't asleep. There's a quiet moment right before dawn when the light is soft enough to blur edges, when even reality seems half asleep. And in that hush, you may begin to wonder, if life feels this much like a dream, then who exactly is dreaming it? Somewhere between the weight of your body on the bed and the gentle flicker of thought behind your eyes, a paradox drifts in. Eastern philosophies have long whispered that what we call reality might be nothing more than Maya, a beautiful, intricate illusion. Not in the way a lie is false, but in the way a rainbow shimmers. It's there, and yet not solid. The trees, the laughter, your morning routines, perhaps all of it is dream stuff. But if that's so, then you're not the person moving through the dream. You're the awareness noticing it, watching, listening. Do you ever feel like none of this is quite settled? One person asks softly in a late-night conversation. The other smiles, almost apologetically. Yeah, like there's a layer I'm not supposed to see, but I can feel it. Like a veil I can't touch, only sense. Lucid dreamers speak of realizing, mid-dream, that they're dreaming, and suddenly the rules bend. Gravity becomes optional, walls disappear, the dream becomes clay. But what if that realization isn't limited to sleep? What if your waking life is also sculptable, also unreal in the same quiet way? The philosopher's brain in a vat scenario, the simulation theories of modern physics, they're all different languages speaking to the same itch. This can't be all there is, and maybe it isn't. The unsettling part isn't that reality might be a dream. It's that the you inside the dream, the one with memories, desires, habits, might not be the real you at all. Just as a character in a dream doesn't know it's being dreamed, perhaps you've mistaken the actor for the audience. And in moments of stillness, when thoughts grow thin, something else appears behind them. Not another thought, but a space, a presence, quiet, formless, aware. So, what do you do with that? The first voice asks again, voice almost a whisper. Nothing, comes the reply. That's the point. You don't have to do anything. You just have to notice. This noticing isn't effortful. It doesn't require belief or disbelief. It's not a new idea to memorize, but an old truth rediscovered, like remembering a name that's been on the tip of your tongue for years. You don't wake up by opening your eyes wider. You wake up by letting the noise soften. You let go, and the background becomes the foreground. The dream fades, not because it's over, but because it's finally seen for what it is, a projection across the surface of something deeper. And perhaps the calmest truth of all is this: you don't have to solve the dream. You don't have to escape it. You only have to rest in the knowing that you are not what moves through it, but the stillness it moves across. Now, carry that stillness with you. Let it breathe through your ribs. Let it quiet the mind without silencing it. Because next, we're going to trace something even more elusive, more powerful. Even in dreams, you believe. But what is belief really? Let's drift into that. The belief that believed itself. There's a peculiar silence that settles in when you begin to notice the beliefs that move beneath your thoughts. Not the loud declarations, not the mantras or mottos, but the quiet assumptions. The ones that were never questioned because they were never named. It's like breathing underwater and only realizing much later that the water had always been tinted by someone else's ink. A belief isn't always a decision. Often, it's a momentum. It carries you like a river that forgets it had a source. You believe something, not because it's true, not because you tested it, but because it believed itself. A self-justifying loop, like a mirror reflecting another mirror, until there's no origin, only echo. You ever wonder why I always expect people to leave? One voice says softly in the dark, curled on the couch. The other pauses. Because they always do? Or do they leave because I expect them to? And there it is, the loop, the belief that feeds itself. You expect to be unloved, so every small distance feels like rejection. You believe the world is cruel, so kindness feels suspicious. And when those suspicions guide your actions, your world begins to arrange itself to reflect them, until even coincidence looks like confirmation. Confirmation bias isn't a flaw of logic. It's the architecture of the mind trying to protect its worldview. You see what you already assume. You notice what you already fear. You gather evidence for a theory you didn't even realize you were testing. It's comforting, in a way, predictable, but also a trap. Because if your reality is shaped by what you believe, and your beliefs shape what you see, how do you ever break the cycle? Here's the quiet terror in the loop. You didn't choose most of your core beliefs. They were absorbed. From parents. From pain. From a moment that defined too much of you too quickly. Some of them feel like truths only because you've never met an alternative you trusted more, and maybe freedom doesn't come from choosing new beliefs, but from seeing the old ones as optional. From sitting with the thought, what if I'm wrong about this? Not as a challenge, but as a whisper of possibility. I think I've spent most of my life proving something to no one. One voice admits. The other nods. Maybe it's time to stop proving and start questioning. As the night deepens and your breath slows, consider how many of your thoughts are just habits of belief, not reality, not fate, just rehearsed perspectives. You are not your beliefs. You are the awareness that can see them come and go. And if belief is a trap, what happens when we try to describe the trap using the very words it taught us? What happens when language itself becomes a wall? Let's follow that question now, deeper into the space between meaning and silence. The sentence that locked the mind. A quiet voice once said, "Be careful with words. They build the walls you live in." And maybe you didn't quite believe it at the time. But look around. How often do we walk through rooms entirely made of labels? We think in sentences. But those sentences don't just describe the world. They shape it, trap it, reduce it. The moment you call someone lazy, you forget the weight they carry. Say genius, and you miss the nights of self-doubt and failure. Words draw lines, sharp and final, through things that were never meant to be simple. You start to see not the world itself, but the scaffolding of your language. Two friends stand in a bookstore. One pauses at a biography and mutters, "She was difficult." The other tilts his head, smiling. Or maybe just detailed. The label hung heavy for a moment, then peeled off quietly, like a misapplied sticker on an old notebook. Faint residue, but gone. You see, language divides. It says, "This is a tree," but the word doesn't carry the scent of bark after rain, or the tremble of leaves in dusk light. It calls someone homeless, but forgets their childhood dog, their favorite singer, the time they danced alone in a kitchen full of steam. Every noun flattens a story into a summary. Every adjective makes a universe smaller. And still, we need language. It lets us love, cry, beg, confess. But it also hides its cost, because for every truth words give us, they take something away. A thing unnamed can be anything, but once it's named, it's tamed. A woman once said softly on a bus, "He called me clingy, but I was just scared of being forgotten." And that sentence, the one spoken about her, became a lock, one that silenced her own story, until she said it out loud. Language has teeth. It bites off the edges of reality and leaves behind chewable chunks, easy to swallow, easy to file. But the truth? The real, messy, aching truth? It's often too large for words. It spills past the edges of the sentence. So where does that leave us? It leaves us learning to speak without slicing, to hold stories without pinning them down. It means listening to what people mean, even when their words are clumsy. And perhaps, every once in a while, it means falling quiet. Because silence doesn't simplify. Silence lets things breathe. And when you feel trapped by the labels you've collected, not good enough, too much, never ready, you can ask gently, who wrote this sentence? And what happens if I stop reading it? Let's walk now, to the cliff where language runs out, beyond the neat grammar of thought, beyond nouns and verbs, into a space that cannot be spoken, only known, where paradox doesn't confuse, it comforts, where being and not being are just two sides of the same exhale. The truth that contradicted itself. You've probably felt it before, when something you thought you understood suddenly folds in on itself, like standing between two mirrors and watching your reflection vanish into infinity. There's a tension in the mind, a quiet ache, when logic is stretched past its breaking point. But maybe, just maybe, that's where something deeper begins. Late at night, when the world dims into softness, contradiction loses its sharpness. The need to choose between black and white fades, and in its place, a gentle gray whispers that both might be true. In Zen teachings, monks speak of emptiness and form not as opposites, but as reflections. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Words that sound like riddles, yet hold a strange kind of peace if you let them sit quietly beside you. And physics, that most rational of disciplines, agrees in its own strange language. Quantum particles can be in two states at once, a cat both alive and dead until someone looks. It isn't a metaphor, it's math. Reality, at its most fundamental, doesn't always obey our desire for clean lines. A thing can be both this and that, or neither, or something entirely unexpected. The truth doesn't bend to fit our minds. Sometimes, our minds must soften to hold it. There's a small, thoughtful conversation playing out somewhere in a dim kitchen, perhaps over lukewarm tea. But how can both be true? That I'm strong and fragile? That I feel brave but want to hide? Because you're not a puzzle to solve. You're a wave. You're a moment in motion. And maybe that moment holds multitudes. It's not comfortable, this kind of truth. It doesn't settle like a final answer. It lingers, like incense, curling into places you hadn't looked before. But in its softness, there's room to rest. Paradox isn't a dead end. It's a resting place between breaths. A quiet invitation to loosen the grip of certainty and simply be with what is. When you stop fighting the contradiction, something curious happens. Peace appears, not by choosing a side, but by watching the whole thing unfold without needing it to resolve. Not knowing becomes a sanctuary. not a flaw. So let go now, not of the paradox, but of the need to solve it. There's something waiting in that tension, something human and whole. And as your mind settles into the rhythm of that impossibility, notice, the next idea doesn't arrive with explanation, but with motion. Let it move you. The arrow that never moved. There's a strange hush in the air when you start to notice time differently, not as a stream, but as a flicker. One frame, then another, like an old film reel clicking quietly in a dusty projector room. The world, which once seemed to glide, now feels like it trembles in a still dance. And the question begins to pulse behind your eyes. If every moment is frozen, when did anything actually move? Zeno's arrow never flew. Not really. At every exact moment of its flight, it was simply still, fixed in space, unmoving. Yet when viewed in sequence, it appears to cut the sky, like a bird caught in a slideshow. So where does motion live? Not in the individual frames, not in the now, but in something between them, something our minds stitch together with habit and hope. Hey, have you ever noticed that when you replay a video frame by frame, you never really see movement, just snapshots? Yeah, but we still say the character ran, or jumped, or smiled, even though we never caught them in the act. Exactly. So what if we're the same? Just moments stacked in memory, dressed up as continuity. And that's the quiet terror tucked inside this thought, that what you call yourself may be no more than a collage of still images. Your first kiss, a bad haircut, the moment your mother laughed, and the way it made your throat tighten. Each one paused, frozen, meaningful on its own but still, and only when viewed in rhythm do they dance. So perhaps you never change in the way you believe. Perhaps there is no continuous you crossing a timeline, just a succession of moments the mind threads into a necklace of meaning. Memory ties them, desire pushes them forward, but the beads themselves? Silent, separated. And when you lie still like this, body soft against the pillow, air folding gently over your chest, you begin to understand. There's nothing you must do, no movement to make, because presence is already happening, not in rushing, but in staying, in watching. A whisper from across the sheets. You awake? What are you thinking about? I'm wondering if we ever really go anywhere, or if it just feels that way. A pause, then a soft reply. I think it's okay, even if we're just still. It's a small comfort, isn't it? That maybe motion was never required, that maybe being here, fully here, was always enough. That time, like self, isn't a line you walk, but a tapestry that flickers when you dare to look closely. And so, we drift now, not into certainty, but into something more forgiving. The next thread in this silent animation doesn't ask who you are. It asks whether that question ever truly made sense at all. The name you mistook for yourself. Somewhere between the moment you learned to answer to your name and the day you first felt misunderstood, a subtle shift occurred. You started mistaking the sound of that name, the syllables others called you, for the essence of who you were. But were you truly born as that name? Or were you simply given it, like a jacket handed to you in a storm, long before you ever chose the weather? A name is not a self, nor is your job title, your role in the family, your diagnosis, or even your reputation. These are the signs we hang on the outer walls of our lives, hoping someone might understand the architecture within. Yet architecture isn't identity. A cathedral can bear the name of a saint, but its stillness has nothing to do with words. You may have been called smart, difficult, successful, lazy. Each label fits for a moment, like a costume in a passing scene. But costumes wear out. Scenes change. And still, something watches quietly from behind the curtain, unmoved by applause or critique. "Do you ever feel," she asked softly one evening, "like the person everyone thinks you are isn't exactly you?" He nodded, stirring his tea. "Yeah, it's like I'm playing a part I didn't audition for. And if you stopped playing it." He looked up. "Then who am I?" That question echoes longer than any answer. It lingers when the room is quiet, when the titles fall away, when you're just a presence, breathing, noticing, being. And in that moment, there's no need to be anyone. There is only awareness, spacious, wordless, still. Most people spend a lifetime trying to become someone. But what if the truth lies in unbecoming? In gently peeling off each layer, the achiever, the fixer, the survivor, the sinner, until nothing remains but the awareness that was there before the world told you what to be? This isn't a rejection of identity. It's a curiosity beneath it. Because even when the stories fade, when no one's watching, when no one is calling your name, you are still here, and that you has never needed a label. So tonight, as the noise softens and the world loosens its grip, let's quietly begin to release the names, not with force, not with anger, but like mist dissolving in dawn light, one breath at a time, one thought at a time, until what remains is so simple, so silent, it no longer asks, "Who am I?" Because what comes next isn't a name or a story or even a thought. What comes next is presence. The thought that watched itself. There's a quiet kind of vertigo that comes not from heights, but from looking inward, so deep, so steady, that the gaze begins to fold in on itself. You sit still, eyes closed, and a thought arises. I am thinking. And in that moment, something strange happens. The thinker becomes the thought. The observer becomes what is observed. It's a loop, not circular but recursive, like two mirrors facing each other in a narrow hallway where reflections multiply without end. Each layer aware of the last, but never stepping beyond its frame. Douglas Hofstadter called this a strange loop, a system that refers to itself not because it wants to, but because it has nowhere else to go. Do you ever think about who's doing the thinking? Someone asked me once while stirring honey into tea. Only when I forget I'm the one doing it, I said, not entirely sure if that made sense or made it worse. And yet, there's a peculiar calm in this confusion, like watching a ripple move across still water, even as you realize you are both the ripple and the eye that watches it. In those moments, the mind doesn't just think, it knows it is thinking. And then it begins to ask, what is doing the knowing? Two people pass on the sidewalk. One pauses to tie their shoe. The other slows, not to help, but out of instinct. Their minds meet for half a second in silent coordination, each one momentarily aware of the other's awareness. No words, no need, just a flicker of self in another. This is the texture of consciousness, slippery, spiraling, intimate. It's not something you stand outside of. It's something you move through. You can't grab it, but you can notice when it's noticing itself. And yet, if awareness only refers back to awareness, what anchors it? What keeps it from being just a clever illusion, like a hand drawing itself in a paradoxical sketch? A friend once said to me, "Some thoughts feel like looking through glass, others like looking into it." That stayed with me, because this thought, the one that watches itself, it's not just a thought. It's a threshold, a turning inside out. It doesn't lead forward, it leads inward. And as you settle deeper, as your breath slows and your body softens into stillness, you might begin to notice how the thought watching itself isn't trying to solve anything. It isn't rushing. It's simply being present, curious, a candle watching its own flame. So when you find yourself tangled in that loop, don't fight it. Let it loop. Let the mirror reflect the mirror. Because on the other side of that endless recursion is the quiet truth that needs no answer. Let's step closer now, not to escape it, but to move through it. Because up ahead is something stranger still, a mirror that doesn't just reflect you once, but repeats you again and again into infinity. The infinity inside the mirror. It begins as a simple act. Two mirrors placed face to face, harmless, almost playful. But the moment they align, something strange happens. A corridor opens, a tunnel of reflections within reflections, images folding into themselves, receding toward an unreachable vanishing point. The further you peer into this optical loop, the more it seems like you're not just looking at infinity, but into it. Have you ever stared into two mirrors like that? Yeah, at a barbershop when I was a kid. I thought I saw myself 100 times over. Did it feel like you were still you in there? I don't know. After a while, it felt like I wasn't even the first one, just one in a line. This isn't just a visual trick, it's a metaphor hiding in plain sight. The mirror shows us recursion, a loop not of space, but of perception. And the same happens inside your mind, quietly, every day. You think about a thought. Then you reflect on how that thought made you feel. Then you remember the last time you felt that way. And suddenly, you're inside a hall of inner mirrors. Each layer reflects back another. And you, the observer, get pulled deeper in. The mirror doesn't lie, but it never gives you the whole truth either. It only shows what it receives. So when your mind reflects itself, thought upon thought, emotion upon memory, who's the original? Where does it begin? You say, I'm anxious because I keep thinking I'll fail. But maybe it's not failure you're afraid of. It's the thought of being someone who's afraid to fail. That's not a fear. That's a reflection of a fear. Recursive, self-looping. You are caught in thought about thought about thought. And like the mirror, it can feel endless. The question arises, is there an original you outside the layers? Or are you made of mirrors too? Memories reflecting beliefs, reflecting stories, all built on top of each other until there's no fixed center. There's no need to panic. The mind is a beautiful architect of these structures. But it helps to notice them, to stand at the mouth of the mirror tunnel and see it for what it is. Not a trap, but a pattern. Do you think there's a way out? Maybe not out, but through. By noticing the loop without chasing it. Just watch it? Yeah, like watching a mirror settle into stillness. And in that stillness, something else appears. Not a reflection, but a presence. Not a thought, but awareness. It doesn't bounce back. It just is. So now, let's stop chasing the mirror. Let the image fade. Let the reflections soften until they return to silence. Because what follows next can only be heard when the echoes fall quiet. The silence that spoke louder than thought. She didn't answer. And somehow, that said more than anything she could have spoken. The conversation paused like a held breath between them, a hush stretching across the cafe table while the clinking of cups and faint hum of chatter filled the space they left unsaid. What does that mean? He finally asked, half smiling, more curious than upset. She just tilted her head, her eyes soft but steady. He nodded. Got it. You don't have to explain. Not every truth wears the shape of language. Sometimes it walks barefoot, unannounced, through the pauses between sentences. The most honest moments in life are often wordless. The hug after bad news, the first glance after a long absence, the touch of a hand that knows you're not okay, even before you speak. Lao Tzu once said, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." And you feel this, not as philosophy, but as something that's already happened in your body. That moment when you walk into a room and sense something is wrong before anyone says a word, or when you hear someone's silence and realize it's not absence, but depth. Words are tools, but silence is architecture. Thoughts chatter, narratives compete, but beneath them all, there's a quiet watcher, a stillness that doesn't need to argue or convince or defend. It just is. A friend once said, "I don't know what to say." And the reply was, "Then don't. Just stay." We often rush to explain, thinking clarity must come from sentences, diagrams, theories. But what if the mind isn't a puzzle to solve, but a landscape to rest in? What if healing doesn't come through reasoning, but through presence? In music, the power of a note is shaped by the silence that surrounds it. In conversations, the weight of truth is often carried by the moment just before someone speaks. That stillness, it's not empty. It holds everything. You are not your thoughts, not the storm of internal narration trying to make sense of who you are, or where you've been, or what tomorrow demands. You are the space those thoughts pass through. The sky that holds the weather, not the clouds themselves. Even in everyday life, silence shows up where words falter. When someone holds the door a second longer for you than necessary. When a stranger makes eye contact on the train and gently looks away. When you feel understood not by what someone says, but by how they stayed. It's in those quiet margins of experience where the self can exhale. If you're still awake, that's okay. If you've drifted a little, that's welcome too. This isn't a destination, it's a soft return. So tonight, if your thoughts keep speaking, let them. But don't follow everyone. You don't need to outthink them. Just rest a few inches beneath them, in that space where nothing is said, and yet everything is known. We'll stay here for just a moment longer. And then, we'll meet the one who watches that silence. Not a voice, not a name, but a quiet awareness that never leaves, no matter what changes around it. The witness without a face. Sometimes in the quiet, just before sleep, or during a walk when the world pauses, something strange and simple happens. You stop thinking, not by force, not through effort. It just ceases. And in that moment, you don't vanish. You remain. Not as a name, a memory, a plan, or a self-description, but as something still, aware, present. There's no voice narrating, no judgment filtering, no story anchoring the moment to a past or pulling it toward a future. Just an open space, like the sky at dusk, vast, silent, observing everything yet untouched by it. That's the witness. It doesn't speak, but it hears. It doesn't react, but it notices. It doesn't try to be. It already is. Have you ever had that feeling? She asked softly, lying on the grass beside him. Like you're watching your life instead of living it? He turned his head, eyes half closed. Yeah, especially when everything gets really quiet. Like I'm still here, but no one's talking inside. That's what I mean, she whispered. It's not scary though. Just empty, but not in a bad way. Maybe that's the real us, he replied. Not the chatter, not the memories, just the part that sees. And maybe he was right. Maybe what we call me is just a bundle of thoughts looping on themselves, endlessly narrating a story that doesn't need a narrator. But beneath all that, a listener lives, one that doesn't argue or defend, doesn't chase identity or run from change. It watches the sadness come and go like weather, watches joy light up and fade like fireflies in a summer field. You are not the thoughts. You are where the thoughts appear. You are not the voice. You are the silence that holds it. You're not even the dream, but the presence in which the dream arises. It's easy to forget this, especially when the world pulls at your mind with its noise, its demands, its mirrors of identity. But you've always known, deep down, there's a space behind the thinking, not detached, not aloof, just still. Like the blank page behind a story, like the screen behind the movie. Without it, no story could unfold at all. And here's the paradox. That formless witness has been with you since before your first memory, and it'll remain after the last. It isn't bound by time, nor defined by language. It doesn't strive to be seen, because it's what's seeing. It has no face, because it wears them all. Now, rest in that presence. Don't try to find it. It's already looking through your eyes. Breathe in. Feel the thoughts dissolve like mist in morning light. What remains is you, not the person, not the name, just the awareness that holds it all. And now, let's take one more gentle step, not into more silence, but into something stranger, the question that reality keeps hiding, yet never quite answers. The universe that asked why. Why is there something rather than nothing? It's not just a question, it's the question. A quiet ache beneath every conversation, every starry night, every breath taken when no one's speaking. Why does anything exist at all? Science gives us process. It maps the chain of causality, the Big Bang, the inflation, the formation of matter. It tells us how the universe unfolds, like a cosmic clockwork running forward through time. But how is not why. Physics is a map, not a reason. And when you ask why the laws of physics exist in the first place, science quietly steps aside. Some turn to theology. They speak of a divine intention, a mind behind the veil of creation. But that only shifts the question. If God made everything, who or what made God? If you say nothing made God, why not say the same of the universe? These thoughts don't resolve. They deepen. One answer births another question. You circle back to the beginning, only to realize you never truly left it. Maybe we're not supposed to know, she whispers one evening, her voice barely louder than the hum of the ceiling fan. But isn't that still something? He replies, staring at the wall. Even not knowing is something. Even the silence is part of it. There's a pause, the kind that makes you aware of your breathing. I think, she says, the question isn't about finding an answer. It's about remembering that we're inside the asking. Some philosophers suggest the question itself might be flawed. That why presupposes a logic that doesn't apply to the foundations of being, like trying to taste with your eyes or hold music in your hands. Maybe the mind is too tangled in its own architecture to step beyond it. Maybe the very desire for a reason is just part of the dream. And yet, the question remains. It lingers not to be solved, but to wake us up, to keep the human spirit from falling asleep inside routine, to remind us that we live inside a miracle we don't understand, that every blink, every stone, every laugh in the dark is impossibly here. Maybe existence doesn't need a reason. Maybe it is the reason. Or maybe when we ask why, the universe smiles quietly and answers with us. Let that thought soften. Let the edges blur. Because the next idea isn't a question. It's a feeling, something that moves through you when no one's looking and leaves before you can say its name. The feeling that had no word. There are moments, soft, flickering, when something moves in you without ever arriving fully. A sensation stirs behind your ribs, too slippery to hold, too quiet to name. It visits when music stops at just the right note, or when you catch yourself pausing mid-thought on a train, not sure why you're blinking faster than usual. Something ancient, subtle, true, but wordless. One evening, as two strangers waited in line at a bus stop under light rain, one said, "Do you ever get that sort of echo in your chest when the sky's about to change?" The other nodded, not quite smiling. Like a memory you didn't live. Their exchange needed no more words. Some feelings arrive that way, like glances between lifetimes. Language is loyal, but limited. It wants to help, to shape, to classify. But not everything is meant to be held that tightly. The Japanese speak of yugen, a deep shadowed beauty that eludes full comprehension. The Portuguese sigh with saudade, a longing that's less about what was and more about what almost could have been. English, meanwhile, stumbles with metaphors. Butterflies in the stomach, a lump in the throat, a heart sinking. They're close, but they miss. Not because we're bad at words, but because some truths live in the silence between them. There's an entire vocabulary of emotion that never made it into dictionaries. It's the warm ache of letting go of something you never owned. The stillness you feel when you realize the world doesn't owe you an explanation, and yet, somehow, you forgive it anyway. A friend once said over tea, "It's weird. I keep trying to explain what this week felt like, but it's more like colors in my head, like dusk, but with too many windows." You understood. You always do. Because even if our tongues trip, our presence doesn't. That's the quiet miracle. You don't need to name something to know it's real. You don't need to explain a storm to feel the rain. Your consciousness was never designed to run on words alone. Beneath language is the pulse. Beneath the pulse is awareness. Beneath awareness, a current. And in that current lives the essence of these unnamed emotions, experiences too wide for grammar, too delicate for definitions. They shape your dreams, nudge your choices, paint your memories with shades that no palette could prepare for. So when you lie awake and wonder what that strange feeling is, the one you can't Google or confess, trust that it matters anyway. It's not a malfunction. It's part of what makes you whole. Let that current carry you, not forward, not backward, but deeper, because the next mystery waiting for you doesn't speak. It flickers, reflects, illuminates. It lives in light. The light that folded inward. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full. Full like a lantern gently burning in a room with no walls, no floor, no ceiling, just presence. And in that presence, a strange question flickers. Can light see itself? Not in reflection, not by bouncing off something else, but directly, inwardly, purely. A whisper passes between two voices. Do you ever feel like you're watching yourself think? All the time, and sometimes. I wonder who's watching the watching. In physics, light moves forward. It doesn't loop back. It doesn't stop to gaze inward. But in the realm of mind, of being, something more mysterious unfolds. Consciousness, unlike light, can bend in on itself. It becomes aware of being aware. A loop with no start, no end, no object, just the sheer presence of observation. This isn't thought. It's not an idea. Thought needs language, needs shape. But this awareness is silent. It doesn't judge or narrate. It simply is, not focused outward on things, but inward, like light folding into light, until there's nothing left but the glow itself. What mystics and poets have tried to name for centuries, perhaps this is it, the stillness beneath perception, the witness beneath the witnessing, a place where even the word you feels too loud, too separate. In that space, there's no memory, no future, only now. Not the now of your schedule or your tasks, but the now that breathes before breath, the now that remains even when thought disappears, a now that doesn't pass, because it never began. The paradox is haunting. This self-lit awareness knows nothing. It doesn't grasp, calculate, or seek, yet in its simplicity, it holds everything. It is the stage on which all thoughts perform, and yet it is never on stage itself. It is the screen that never moves, no matter how wild the movie gets. Maybe that's why we often miss it. We're trained to chase what's next, to define and dissect. But this presence can't be caught, only felt, only allowed. A candle that doesn't cast light outward, but inward, onto the very space that allows seeing to exist at all. And so we rest here, just for a moment, in the inward glow, in the awareness of awareness. Let the thoughts drift like clouds. Let the stories pause. Let the light dim, not into darkness, but into depth, because just beneath this glowing silence, a new door waits. And what lies beyond is not the past and not quite the future, but something the world forgot to bring forth. It's time to listen for what never arrived, but still might. The future that waited without time. There is a kind of future that doesn't sprint toward us. It doesn't tick forward in seconds or burst forth in deadlines. It waits, not passively, but attentively, like a breath held, not from fear, but from reverence. A moment so full it spills over, unmeasured, untouched by the machinery of clocks. You see, linear time, the straight line from past to present to future, is a useful story, but not the only one. In deep silence, in meditative stillness, time begins to lose its grip. It doesn't vanish exactly. It unknots. What was once a ticking rhythm becomes a drifting presence, a soft unfolding rather than a march. In this state, the idea of what's next loosens, and something ancient, something forgotten, starts to hum beneath. There are stories, half lost, half imagined, of places that stepped outside of time's straight line, not through science fiction, but through intention. Whole communities that put down the clock, people who no longer counted life by the hour, but by the weight of a sunrise, the depth of a conversation, the way the wind changed when sorrow passed through a village. In these worlds, time wasn't something you had, it was something you listened to. Children learned not to be on time, but in tune. Farmers planted not by date, but by feel. Lovers didn't celebrate anniversaries, they celebrated presence. Life wasn't tracked, it was touched. You might ask, how did they know they were progressing? How did they measure achievement? The answer would unsettle modern ears. They didn't, because progress to them wasn't motion, it was meaning. They measured depth, not distance, stillness, not acceleration. The wise weren't those who accomplished the most, but those who felt the most while doing less. Hey, someone asks, half drowsy on a pillow beside you, what time is it now? You smile, not checking your phone. Just now, you whisper. They exhale, eyes softening. That's enough? So perhaps the future isn't ahead of us. Perhaps it's beneath us, inside us, waiting for us to stop measuring long enough to actually arrive. You don't need to stop time. You only need to stop believing you're behind it. And from here, where we go next, isn't counted. It's felt. Let the next idea rise, unhurried, unmeasured, because some truths only bloom when the ticking stops. The language of feeling. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean emptiness. It means presence. That hush just before you cry. Or when you're staring out a train window and feel something swell in your chest, but can't say why. That's not confusion. That's a language older than words. You see, before you learned to name sadness or joy, you simply felt them. A baby doesn't say, "I'm overwhelmed." They just cry. A dog doesn't explain it's scared. It tucks its tail. In those moments, expression doesn't require grammar. Just being alive is enough to speak. Neuroscience tells us that emotion is one of the brain's earliest ways of making sense of the world. Long before rational thought, before speech or storytelling, we had sensation. Heat in the chest, pressure in the throat, a flutter behind the ribs. The body's poetry. Sometimes, a feeling arrives with no context, just a mood hanging in the air like weather. You walk into a room and something feels wrong. You hear someone's voice and something inside tightens. You don't know why, but you do know. And maybe that's the whole point. Earlier today at a cafe, someone knocked a cup over and it shattered loudly. A woman nearby flinched, then softly laughed to herself. Her friend asked, "You okay?" She replied, "Yeah, just reminded me of something, I guess." But she didn't explain. She didn't need to. The air around her already had, because not all truths want to be spoken. Some were never made for language. They're like music or scent. You don't describe the smell of your childhood home. You just feel it, and something unspoken stirs. A warmth, a longing, a weightless ache, and trying to explain it only pushes it further away. A man once said quietly, "I didn't know I missed her until I heard that song in a gas station." He wasn't being poetic. He was being precise, in the only way he could. This is the hidden logic of the heart. It communicates not through facts, but resonance, through trembling hands, through the way your voice hesitates before saying, "I'm fine," through the pause in your breath when you read an old message and pretend it didn't mean anything. We are taught to trust words, but maybe language is just the translation, not the origin. Maybe feeling is the message, and what we call emotion is the sentence. And maybe, on some days, silence is the period at the end of a sentence only your body could write. So if something tonight feels tight, or open, or tender, don't rush to define it. Sit with it. Let it speak. Not in English, not in thought, but in the quiet cadence of the soul. Because the next idea may arrive not with meaning, but with presence, and it might not even belong to you. Close your eyes now. Let the next rhythm rise, not from your mind, but from somewhere deeper, where language never lived, but knowing always did. The echo that became a being. It started with a thought, small, fleeting, a whisper in a crowded room of other whispers, but it repeated. Someone else heard it. They repeated it too. And suddenly, it wasn't just yours anymore. "What if ideas could walk?" she asked. He blinked, staring at the ceiling. "Walk?" "Yeah, think about how often some ideas show up. Love, power, justice. It's like they don't die. They just wait to be spoken again." In the quiet that followed, the room seemed to hum, as if it remembered. Thoughts, when repeated often enough, begin to take on weight. Language gives them shape. Rituals give them rhythm. Culture gives them color. A thought passed from one mind to another gains momentum like a wave passed through hands in the dark. Eventually, it stops needing a speaker. It starts to echo on its own. There is a theory, subtle and strange, that in one forgotten strand of reality, echoes did not fade. Instead, they thickened. Each repeated phrase, each myth retold, each fear rehearsed by 1,000 anxious hearts began to condense, first as archetypes, then as presence, consciousness woven from resonance. In that world, freedom was not just a word. It walked. It had shape, history, expression. It wandered barefoot through cities, climbed mountains, dissolved empires, and whispered into the ears of dreamers and tyrants alike. Fear had eyes. Memory had a face. Regret left footprints in the snow. Your thoughts, those private loops you mutter silently at 2 a.m., were not locked in your skull. They radiated. They joined the choir of similar frequencies. Enough repetition, and the echo became real. She shifted under the blanket. Do you think we're just hosting these ideas? Like we're vessels? He nodded slowly. Or maybe we are the echo, and we just haven't stopped long enough to notice. That's the haunting possibility, that what we call self might just be a congealed loop of stories told too often, a meme that learned to look in the mirror. Because if an idea can echo across generations, if it can live longer than any body, infect minds faster than any virus, and shape the way people live and die, then doesn't it deserve to be called real? Perhaps we don't think ideas into the world. Perhaps the world thinks us into itself. And if echoes become beings, then what echoes in you? What have you repeated silently for years, unaware that it might be listening? So the next time you hear that thought again, the one that returns every time you're alone, pause. It might not be yours. It might not even be you. Just an echo, learning how to speak. Now close your eyes. The next voice you hear may not be coming from the outside at all. Listen gently, because what follows might be the echo that remembers who you've always been. The chaos that followed the rules. You step into the kitchen late at night. A spoon clinks gently in a mug. The tea swirls with no one stirring it. And outside the window, rain taps its own quiet code onto the glass. Irregular, but not without rhythm. You can't tell if it's noise or music, only that it wants to be heard. There's a strange comfort in chaos, but not the loud, shouting kind. Number the quiet kind that rearranges books without asking, that misplaces your keys, then reminds you, hours later, that you never really needed them. You call it messy. You call it unpredictable. But what if it's just another rhythm you haven't learned to dance to yet? Chaos theory whispers something most of us forget. That wildness doesn't mean lawlessness. Weather moves in spirals. Hearts beat in jagged mathematical rhythm. Galaxies spin not because they're lost, but because they belong to a larger curve, one too wide for us to trace in a single glance. Even a storm obeys a pattern if you're far enough away to see it. Two friends sit on a park bench, watching leaves whirl around their feet. Why does it feel like everything's falling apart? One asks. The other leans back, tracking a leaf as it loops and dives. Maybe it's not falling apart. Maybe it's just rearranging itself into something we don't understand yet. That moment lingers, like breath on cold glass. You begin to sense it in your own life. The moments that felt like disorder were just early drafts of something more elegant. The days that seemed like spirals might have been spirals, yes, but spirals with a center. So much of what we label random is only unfamiliar. Like a language we've never heard spoken, but still has grammar. Even your own thoughts, scattered as they may seem, tend to return to themes, faces, memories, longings. They orbit, not aimless, but drawn by something. A child once dropped marbles on the floor in a library. They scattered across the tiles with sound and sparkle. And yet, weeks later, someone noticed. All the marbles had come to rest in the same corner, as if pulled. Maybe your chaos knows where it's going. Maybe it's teaching you a path by not showing it. Or maybe, just maybe, some beauty can't be seen until the pattern has passed all the way through you. So let's not chase the logic tonight. Let's rest in it. Let the messes breathe. Let the spirals turn. Because what comes next does not rush to survive. It simply listens. The civilization that dreamt. It was a seed. There was once a civilization that did not fear death, but rehearsed it, not as tragedy, but as metamorphosis. They had towers of light, music without instruments, and archives that shimmered like starlight trapped in stone. But rather than reaching higher, rather than expanding outward to conquer time or space, they chose something stranger. They stopped. They turned inward. They folded their great culture like a letter to the unknown and buried it, not in despair, but in trust. It was as if they understood something we don't, that growth, true growth, does not always look like movement, that silence can be a kind of intelligence, that a pause, when fully embraced, becomes sacred. What happened to them? Nothing. That's the point, said the old gardener to the child. But they just disappeared? Number. They became something else, like seeds. They rested. For how long? As long as needed. No signs of collapse, no ruins in ruin. Instead, whole cities placed under quiet earth, minds encoded into dormant crystal, stories compressed into rhythm and stored in roots. They gave up the noise of progress for the stillness of incubation. Theirs was not the fall of an empire. It was the breath held between notes, the cocoon spun by a being ready to unbecome. You might think of this as failure, but they did not. They called it becoming seed, not metaphorically, ritually, ceremonially. Entire generations trained in surrender, not to be saved, not to escape, but because they believed that waiting, when done with intention, births deeper futures. Their calendars didn't track time. They tracked potential. Their monuments weren't built to last. They were designed to disappear and return. Their faith was not in preservation, but in transformation. They knew that some truths must go underground to survive. A civilization that dreamt it was a seed doesn't die. It germinates. Beneath the soil of forgetting, beneath the pressure of waiting, it absorbs darkness like memory absorbs emotion, quietly, without end. The more it surrenders, the more it stores. Perhaps that's what we are feeling now, too. This sense of compression, the folding inward. The stillness that feels like stagnation might just be the root forming in the unseen. Maybe our exhaustion is not failure, but the soft instruction to pause, to bury the old self, not in shame, but in patience. You think they'll come back? They never left, the gardener whispered, brushing soil from the edge of a glowing stone. They're just waiting for us, to remember how to wait. So curl inward, not out of fear, but in reverence. The most ancient futures begin again in darkness, quiet, unseen, and full of life yet to bloom. The child you left behind. You used to know a version of yourself who didn't need reasons, who stared at clouds and found dragons, not weather, who believed, not because it made sense, but because it felt true. And then, life asked for proof. It didn't ask gently. Maybe it was the first time someone laughed at what you loved, or when someone said, "Grow up," not like advice but like a warning. And so piece by piece you did. Now you carry plans, responsibilities, a voice that often doubts before it dreams. But have you ever wondered where they went? That barefooted, wide-eyed self, the one who once thought the moon was following them home. You always talk to yourself when you're walking alone? The question came from a kid sitting cross-legged by the fountain. Sometimes, you answered. It helps organize the noise. They nodded, dipping fingers into the rippling water. I talk to the sky, they said. It remembers stuff better than I do. You wanted to laugh but didn't, because something about that felt more organized than your own method. As children, we don't need instructions to feel awe. We don't ask if we're worthy of joy before laughing. We trust, without signing contracts or defining our value in productivity. And when a question arrived, we didn't rush to solve it. We sat with it, colored it, let it live on the wall. But growing up brings measurement. Logic becomes a leash. And somehow, knowing better starts to mean feeling less. What if that was backwards? What if you haven't outgrown the child you were, but only overlaid them with layers too tight to breathe? In a quiet cafe, two friends talk over tea. One stirs slowly. I used to think leaves changed color because they got tired of being green. The other smiles. You know, that's still the explanation I like best. Neither is wrong, but one is closer to wonder. That child you left behind is still here, not frozen in some golden past, but crouched quietly in the shadows of your choices, still hoping you'll notice the way a candle dances, still wishing you'd look up when it starts to rain. You didn't lose that self. You paused them. For safety, for structure, for speed. But tonight there's no deadline. There's only this breath, and the one after. So if a younger you takes your hand now, don't pull away. Let them lead for a bit. Let their silence speak louder than your plans. Because that old version of you may have been the last one who remembered how to truly see. Let's walk with them now, not to return to childhood, but to bring its wisdom forward, toward a star still breathing, quietly, in your chest. The star that hid inside your breath. You think you're small, but the quiet rise and fall of your chest is older than you know. Somewhere between an inhale and a sigh, the entire universe folds into your lungs, briefly, invisibly, like a memory you never realized you carried. There's a story told in silence, that long before your body had shape, it had ancestry in light. The carbon in your muscles, the iron in your blood, the oxygen your heart clings to. These were not born on Earth. They were forged in stars, sculpted in the supernovae that painted the early cosmos. You are, in the most literal sense, made of star remnants. But it doesn't stop there. Recent whispers in quantum biology suggest something more hauntingly beautiful, that your cells, your breath, the dance of molecules in your lungs, they don't just contain the universe, they mirror it. The same principles that govern the collapse of wave functions in particles may ripple into the decisions your DNA makes. The rhythm of your breath is not isolated. It may be entrained to cosmic fluctuations, echoing the pulse of galaxies long gone. Hey, do you ever think we're way bigger than we feel? What do you mean? Like spiritually? No, like maybe when we breathe, the universe breathes with us, like we're not just living in it. We are it, in a smaller loop. That's actually kind of comforting, like we're not lost, just repeating a pattern too big to see. Every breath you take isn't just pulling in air, It's participating in a rhythm that began before language, before memory, before matter even cooled. That rhythm shaped suns and spun galaxies. Now it stirs in your diaphragm, disguised as calm. And so perhaps you're not a fragment of something greater, but a gesture of it. The universe never broke itself into pieces. It just exhaled, and you happened. For a few brief decades, the cosmos folded into bone and skin and gave itself your name. And now, at night, as the world softens and the sky turns down its volume, all it asks is that you breathe, not for survival, but for remembrance. Let your breath become more than routine. Let it become recognition, not of who you are, but of what you've always been. So breathe again. This time, not for air. Breathe to return. Breathe to recall. Because perhaps, just perhaps, the star never left. It only learned how to whisper from inside your breath. And from that whisper, we'll drift quietly onward toward a thought that folds memory back into light. The moment that refused to end. It was just the scent of cinnamon, that's all. Faint, like something left behind in the folds of time. But suddenly, you weren't here anymore. You were 6. Your grandmother's kitchen, the ticking clock, the warm hush before someone says something kind. Moments like that don't pass. They wait, quietly, until the world softens just enough for them to step back in. One person speaks, half smiling at their own memory. Do you ever smell something and feel like you're being time-traveled against your will? And the other replies without hesitation, yeah, like my body's still here, but something older in me just stood up and walked away. That's how memory works. Not as a timeline, but as a spiral. You don't revisit the past, you re-enter it. You feel the warmth of a chair that's long gone. You hear laughter that no one remembers but you. And strangely, it still affects you, still changes your breath, still decides how today will unfold. Somewhere in a future that's already forgotten its name, people stopped thinking of memory as storage. They treated it like architecture, not files in a cabinet, but entire rooms still inhabited, still echoing with conversations that feel unfinished. It's not always grand. Sometimes it's the tiniest moment. Someone brushing your shoulder as they walk past. The way someone said your name once, like it mattered more than usual. Those micro moments burrow deep, not to haunt, but to hold you, like they knew something about you before you did. And in that kind of future, memory wasn't something to overcome. It wasn't a weight. It was sacred persistence, a form of reverence, as if the universe itself said, this one mattered. This one stays. Even in your daily life, without realizing it, you shape your choices around moments that never really ended. You pick the blue mug because it reminds you of mornings that felt safe. You walk a little slower past that one building because it remembers you too. Someone once said softly, as they held a crumpled ticket stub between their fingers, "Funny how this piece of paper means more than the whole event ever did." And the other nodded. Yeah, it's like the moment just chose to live here now. And that's the quiet truth. Some moments refuse to fade. Not because you're stuck, but because something in them is still alive, still humming like a thread through your spine, still writing its meaning in the background of your days. So if something won't let go, maybe it's not meant to. Maybe it's not about release, but respect. Maybe the moment didn't end because it's still teaching you something. Or maybe because a part of you is still inside it, kneeling before its small, perfect truth. There's no need to wrestle with it tonight. Just let it breathe. Let it live in you, like a slow song that doesn't finish, just fades into quiet. And in that silence, we descend further, to the next level, where memory isn't the past at all, but something else, something watching you even now. The silence that can't be heard, she asked. Do you hear that? He paused, confused. I don't hear anything. Exactly, she said, smiling. That's the point. We often chase silence like it's a thing to grasp, something to capture between the cracks of noise, a room without voices, a pause between songs, a forest without footsteps. But that's not silence. That's only the absence of sound. The true kind, the real, unsettling, healing kind, can't be heard at all. It can only be felt. You don't find it in a quiet room. You find it in the space behind thought, in that brief flicker between one breath and the next, that sacred hush when the mind forgets what it was clinging to. It's not a void. It's not a blank. It's more like a presence that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, "Here I am." It simply is. And when you're soft enough inside, you remember it's been there all along. Think of it like the sky behind clouds. Thoughts come and go like weather, windy, stormy, dramatic. But silence, it's the blue behind it all, unmoving, constant, not in opposition to sound, but beyond it. It holds the space where sound may or may not appear and remains whole either way. There's a silence that arrives not when you quiet the world, but when the world stops mattering for a moment, when your inner noise exhausts itself, like a child finally asleep in the back seat, and suddenly there's no one left inside who needs to be right, or first, or understood, just the simple awareness that you're here. And it's enough. She asked again, softly, "Do you think we were born with this silence?" He nodded, then looked away. "No. I think we are it, and we just forgot." Because maybe silence isn't something you find through effort, but something you fall into when effort disappears. The moment you stop chasing calm, stop demanding clarity, stop searching for yourself in the echo of things, and in that surrender, something familiar wakes up, not with a sound, but with a knowing, that maybe you were never the noise, never the story, never the spinning thought. Maybe you've always been the space it happened in, the listening, not the thing listened to. So let's not listen now. Let's be the listening itself, not the ears, not the thoughts, just the open field they all pass through. That's the silence that can't be heard, and it's already here. The loop that forgot. It was a loop. There's a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from the body. It's deeper, like your life has been humming the same silent melody for so long. Even your dreams hum along with it. You wake up, you check, you scroll, you react, you sleep, and in between, there's a faint echo, as if something is repeating, but you can't quite name what. Didn't we already talk about this yesterday? Someone might say at the kitchen table. But you're not sure. The days blur, not because nothing's happening, but because everything is happening the same way. Thought by thought, cue by cue, until even the arguments feel choreographed. In systems theory, they call this a feedback loop, a cycle where the output becomes the input. A thought becomes a reaction, which becomes a behavior, which becomes a belief, which circles back into more thoughts. You don't notice the loop when you're inside it, because it mimics life so well. It offers just enough variety to pass as change, just enough control to pass as choice. Why do I always end up in this same conversation with myself? Someone once asked me, and I told them gently, because you're not broken. You're patterned. Loops aren't cages, they're rhythms. They're the structure your nervous system builds to feel safe in a world too fast to process in real time. And once they form, they hum softly in the background, directing your attention without asking for it. But here's the thing. Noticing a loop doesn't mean you have to break it. You can't fight a rhythm with force. It just tightens. But you can step into it, like a dancer joining the beat. Once you see it clearly, it becomes choreography, not a trap. A breath, not a wall. A man once told me he always ended up walking the same street home, not because it was shorter, but because he never questioned it. One day, the sidewalk was blocked. He turned left, discovered a coffee shop he now calls his favorite. Not a revolution, just a curve in the loop. And sometimes, that's enough. To step 1 degree outside the expected. Not to run, but to soften. To blink when the loop blinks. To nod instead of brace. And when you do that, something shifts. Not because the cycle ends, but because you're no longer asleep inside it. Tonight, you don't need to fix the rhythm. Just feel it. Notice its tempo, its signature, where it rises, where it clenches, where it pauses. You've lived this pattern long enough to see it not as a problem, but a partner. So let's pause right here, right in the center of that breath you always take before you explain yourself. Don't explain, don't rewind, don't escape, because the next thing we're about to meet might not be a thought at all. The voice that let you go. You've listened long enough to feel the rhythm behind words. Each syllable, softly shaped, carefully chosen, was never the meaning. It was the gesture. Like a hand extended not to hold, but to release. I've been here, threading thought through the stillness, offering images, paradoxes, warmth in the form of wonder. But even this voice, the one you trusted to walk beside you through the landscapes of mind, is only a tool, a companion you never needed, only thought you did. Are you still there? Yeah. I just realized I don't need the answers anymore. You sure? I think I'm finally okay not knowing. You see, even a gentle guide must eventually step aside. Not because the journey ends, but because the most sacred part of it cannot be narrated. The self that listens must be the one that forgets the need for explanation. And so this voice, so familiar by now, perhaps even comforting, must let go. Not in silence as emptiness, but in silence as trust. The paradox here is quiet and final. The voice that brings you to stillness must itself become still. Like a lantern that led you through shadow, now setting itself down before dawn. There is nothing left to say, not because everything's been said, but because something deeper than words has begun to awaken in you. Something not given, not taught, something remembered. What follows is not a lesson, not a conclusion. It's a blooming, without effort, without definition, like fog lifting to reveal not a path, but the absence of need for one. You're not going to say anything else? Number. But I'll be here, in the silence you no longer fear. As this voice fades, not into absence but into reverence, feel what remains. The breathing space between thoughts. The still center that doesn't vanish when words do. That's not abandonment. That's grace. The final act of care is release. The final gift is emptiness, offered like a sky uncluttered by stars. Still, present, vast. So let the voice fall away now, not as something lost, but as something fulfilled. This isn't the end of the journey. It's the first step that needs no map. And in that soft, invisible threshold, what unfolds isn't thought, it's you. The ending that was always beginning. There's something familiar about this moment, though you can't quite place it. A quiet rhythm under your thoughts, like footsteps retracing a path you've walked before. But it's softer now, slower, as though time itself has stopped trying to move forward and is simply folding back into itself, not as a reversal, but as a remembering. A woman once whispered this in passing at a bookstore, her hand resting lightly on the cover of an old poetry collection. "I don't read to find new things. I read to remember what I've always known." The man behind her nodded without speaking, his eyes scanning the same titles she had just touched. And somehow, both of them were right there, in that return, not searching, just coming home. This is the shape of the ending that was never truly apart from the beginning. Many traditions call it the source. Others speak of it as the true self, the unnameable center. But you don't need words. You've felt this before. Maybe in the quiet just before a goodbye, or in the first breath of morning light when everything feels familiar, but strange. That eerie sensation of, I've been here, not déjà vu. Deeper, as if the moment is greeting you by name. Even the word remember carries a hidden gesture. To remember, to bring the scattered pieces back together. What you thought you had to earn or change or chase was simply waiting. Still, like the friend who left the porch light on even though you forgot to call. This journey never moved you away. It brought you back. And not in circles, spirals, widening each time, deeper each turn. You're not stuck in a loop. You're seeing the same truth from clearer and clearer eyes. One evening, in a cafe that always smells faintly of cinnamon, a barista handed over a coffee with a smile that didn't rush. The person behind them asked, "Is this your first time here?" The reply, "No. It's just the first time I noticed I belonged." That kind of moment, small but seismic, changes the shape of the day, maybe of a life. We often think waking up means becoming someone else. But what if it's the opposite? What if waking is remembering who you were before the forgetting began? No drama, no revelation, just quiet recognition, a gentle yes beneath all the noise. So maybe the end is not an exit, but a soft return. Not a door closing, but a breath taken all the way in. The kind of breath that says, I don't need to go anywhere else. You have arrived. Not at a final point, but at a deeper layer of yourself. Not new, but whole. Let that thought settle in your chest, like a warm stone in water. The weight is not heavy. It's anchoring, not pulling you down, but keeping you close to this moment, to this breath, to what you never actually left. And now, there is nothing left to do, no puzzle to solve, no idea to follow, just the stillness of a thought coming home to silence. The next step doesn't need you to act. It doesn't even need you to understand. It only needs you to be. The place you never left. You've walked 1,000 paths tonight. Some led you through spirals of logic, others down corridors of memory. You've untied paradoxes like knots in a dream. And now, without fanfare, you arrive. But where are you? You're home. Not the kind with doors and keys, but the home beneath thought. A presence too close to see, a quiet too constant to hear. This isn't a destination you reached. It's the place that never left you. All along, the mind whispered that something was missing. That clarity lived just beyond the next insight, the next surrender, the next unraveling. And so, we searched. We reached into silence with questions. We followed thoughts down winding staircases. But what if the final answer wasn't hidden, just overlooked? What if you were never outside the circle, but simply forgot you were the center? In stillness, there's a strange unraveling, not of thought, but of effort. The belief that you must become, must do, must fix. The paradox is that you were never broken. The seeking itself was a beautiful trick, a ritual of remembrance disguised as pursuit. Even the confusion had its place. Even the doubts were invitations, not detours. Two voices sit in a kitchen, warm light catching the edge of a coffee mug. Do you ever feel like you've been running in circles? One asks quietly, fingertips brushing steam. The other nods, smiling. Yeah, but lately, it's like I was never running, just dreaming I forgot where I was. That's strange. Peaceful, though. Exactly. It's like realizing the map was drawn on your own hands. That's this moment. Not an arrival, but a recognition. You didn't travel into truth. You woke up into it. You didn't solve yourself. You softened into what you always were. There is no prize waiting in some distant future. The prize is the pause, the exhale, the space between ideas. Because the place you longed for, the wholeness, the calm, the end of striving, it wasn't a new version of you. It was the old one, never left, just layered in noise and forgetting. And now, the layers have thinned. The noise has bowed. The forgetting has slowed. And in its absence, you remain. Whole, quiet, awake without needing to name it. So take this next breath not as a step forward, but as a folding inward. One final breath, one final echo. You're not arriving, you're remembering. Echoes of the self. You noticed it, didn't you? The silence. Not just the absence of my voice, but the way something still stayed with you. Like warmth left in a room after someone exits, or the scent of rain lingering long after the sky has cleared. Did they leave? Someone might ask. And the other would say, not really. It still feels like they're here. That's where you are now. The voice that guided you, that gentle thread pulling you through paradox and dreamlike logic, has faded. But something deeper hums beneath the hush. It's not a voice anymore. It's resonance. There's a strange comfort in this, like remembering a melody you can no longer hum, yet still knowing every note in your bones. It's the echo of awareness itself, not the thought, I exist, not the label of self, but the presence that watches those ideas float by like leaves on water. I wonder if anyone else feels this, someone whispers in a late-night cafe, as though asking the world rather than the person across from them. The reply comes without delay, and yet it isn't an answer. Just a nod, a shared glance, an acknowledgement that yes, this too has been lived. You are no longer the one trying to make sense of everything. You're the space in which sense arises. You're not trying to figure out who you are. You're the awareness, noticing the question, losing its urgency. And if you pause here, not to search but to be, you'll notice something else. What you thought was absence is actually a clarity too quiet to shout. The noise has settled, the mirrors have gone still, and what's left is not emptiness, but spaciousness. This is not where you were left. This is where you were returned. A friend once said softly at the edge of a long conversation, "You know, I don't think we ever really understand each other. We just stand near the mystery together." And somehow, that made more sense than anything. So here you are. No need to ask anymore. No need to arrive. The room is open. The breath is slow. Even the mind, so used to spinning itself in loops of thought, now simply leans back. And maybe you'll fall asleep here. Or maybe you'll just rest without needing to call it sleep. Because what remains now is not the seeker, but the stillness that welcomed every seeking. And in this space, in this echo, home arrives. A quiet exhale, a warmth in the chest, a world no longer chased, only held. Now we turn to the final breath and let it take us all the way in. The home beyond the loop. You've arrived, but not in the way you once imagined. There's no fanfare, no final revelation, only a soft landing into something that's been waiting all along. Beneath every question, behind every answer, beyond every loop you thought you had to escape, you are stardust that once dreamed of knowing itself. But the dream doesn't end in understanding. It ends in resting. There comes a moment, not loud, not grand, when even the deepest thoughts fall quiet. After all the spirals of logic and the hallways of self-reflection, what's left is not a solution, not even a breakthrough, just stillness, a presence that was never missing, a presence that doesn't need to speak to be known, like a field untouched by footsteps, or a sky before it was named. Two voices sit quietly in a room. Do you still think we needed to figure it all out? One of them whispers. The other smiles, but doesn't answer right away. Just breathes. Softly. Then says, "No. I think we were just meant to return. That's all." Because the truth is not something found at the end of a line of thought. It's the space those thoughts moved through. The space you are. You are not the thought. You are the silence before it. You are not the fear or the doubt or even the clarity. You are the place where they pass through, briefly, like shadows flickering across water. You've never been broken. You've never been late. The search was beautiful, yes, but unnecessary. No more questions now, no more spirals to chase. What you are cannot be improved, cannot be added to. You are not becoming anything. You are simply being, again, fully, quietly, as you always were. Let the loops fade now. Let even this voice, this gentle thread that's guided you through all these layers, fade too. Not because it failed, but because it brought you to the very edge of where language can go. And now, words are no longer needed. They've done their part. A long exhale, a still moment. And in that pause, something opens, not in the mind, but in the space beneath it, in that warm, breathless clarity that existed before the world told you your name. So rest. Not because you've solved the puzzle, but because the need to solve has dissolved. The paradox no longer grips. The voice no longer loops. And the self no longer searches. Sleep now. From the quiet before meaning. From the breath before belief. From the space that holds it all, without needing to change a thing. This was never about the end. It was always about the return. Welcome home. You've walked through loops that devour themselves, held hands with riddles that offered no escape, watched the structure of truth shimmer like heat above asphalt. And yet, in all that collapsing logic, you never disappeared. You, who watched. You, who listened. You remain. Maybe that's the final paradox, that in the face of all that makes no sense, peace is still possible. So rest now. Let the questions wander home. Let the thoughts dissolve like mist from a morning lake. Not every door must be opened. Not every thought must be untangled. Sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is be still and let the mind dream itself quiet. Good night from level 100.